Imagine falling asleep without a single worry pulling at your chest. No thoughts racing, no regrets echoing, no need to fix what's already done or control what hasn't even happened. Just calm, just stillness, just peace. But let's be honest, how often does your mind really let you rest? How many nights have you laid in bed, replaying what went wrong, or trying to predict what comes next, only to wake up more tired than when you closed your eyes? The truth is simple. The more you try to control everything, the more control you lose. Peace doesn't come from fixing the world around you. It comes from learning how to release your grip. That's where Buddhist wisdom steps in, not as a theory, but as a path, a way to let go of what you can't control and finally rest. Tonight, you're going to discover the teachings that monks and masters have used for centuries to quiet the mind, soften the heart, and let the world be as it is, without fear, without tension, without holding on. These aren't just calming bedtime thoughts. They are deep truths that free you from the chains of mental resistance and unlock the stillness already inside you. So, before we begin, make a promise to yourself. Write in the comments, "Tonight, I release what I cannot control. I choose peace." You're not just writing words, you're giving yourself permission to rest. And the more you say it, the more your mind will finally believe it. Say it out loud, say it inside, say it until the weight lifts. Then let the teachings do the rest. Let's begin. So now that your mind has begun to soften and your body is ready to let go, let's start with the first and perhaps most underestimated truth. Silence is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of something far deeper. It is a choice, a practice, a path. And if you understand it, it becomes your greatest ally in a world full of storms. There are moments in life when reacting feels like survival. When someone says something sharp, when plans collapse, when expectations break, the instinct is to respond, to defend, to fix. But have you noticed what happens after those reactions? The tension stays. The peace does not return. It's like trying to calm rippling water by slapping it flat. The more force applied, the more chaos remains. This is where the Buddhist path begins to whisper a different way. Not louder, not angrier, but quieter, still, meditative, rooted in the idea that not all things must be answered and not all waves must be stopped. The silence that answers noise is not the silence of weakness or escape. It is a silence that listens without resistance, that absorbs without drowning, that sees through the noise without needing to push back. This silence is awareness without tension. The noise may still exist, but it no longer holds the power to define your state. When someone attacks you with words, when a day falls apart, when everything feels like it's rushing, this silence becomes your shield. Not a wall, not a weapon, but a shield of still presence. You see what's happening, you feel it, but you don't become it. Many people think peace is something you have to create, but in truth, peace is what remains when you stop disturbing yourself. It's what's left when the storm inside no longer feeds on what's happening outside. The teachings of the Buddha don't tell you to run away from the world or to fight it. They offer a third path, to be still in it, to let it swirl, roar, push, and yet remain centered, clear, aware. This is what non-reaction truly means. Non-reaction is not the same as passivity. It's not about being indifferent or numb. It's the strength to stay present without being pulled into the chaos. It's a stillness that sees clearly and chooses not to dance with every emotion that rises. This is a discipline, a calm forged by understanding, not force. A choice made again and again, not because it's easy, but because it is liberating. Meditative stillness begins with attention, not forced concentration, but gentle presence. When the mind wants to speak, to judge, to control, to narrate, stillness is the part of you that watches without joining in. That sees a thought rising but does not hold on to it. That feels anger arriving but doesn't need to speak it. It's the moment when you pause long enough to feel the space between what happens and how you respond. That space is everything. The Buddha once said, "Just as a solid rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not moved by praise or blame." This isn't a poetic metaphor, it's a real invitation. When someone praises you and your mood lifts, or when they criticize you and your mood crashes, you are no longer the solid rock. You're the wind, you're the thing being moved. But when you learn to stand in your stillness, something shifts. Praise comes, blame follows, and you remain. Not because you're cold, but because you're rooted. This root comes from letting go of resistance. Inner resistance is like clenching your body when something unexpected happens. It's the mental tightness that says, "This should not be happening." But Buddhism teaches that suffering is not in the event. It's in that inner argument. The moment you say, "This must stop, this isn't fair, this must go my way," you are trapped. But when you say, "This is what's happening," and stop fighting it, the pain lessens, the noise weakens. Stillness doesn't mean everything stops around you. It means the inner war ends. You no longer need the world to be perfect before you can rest. You no longer postpone peace until the external noise quiets. You find peace by not needing the noise to stop. And this is where true power begins. In meditation, the stillness is not forced. You don't yell at the mind to be quiet. You let the thoughts come and go like clouds in the sky. You don't chase them. You don't push them away. You sit with them. You watch. And in that watching, you start to notice something strange. There's a part of you that doesn't move, a part that doesn't react. That part is the silence behind the thoughts, and the more you rest in it, the more you discover it's always been there. Daily life gives you the perfect dojo for this practice. Someone cuts in line, you feel irritation. That's your cue, not to shout, not to suppress, but to pause, to feel the tightness rise, and to let it float away. Not by force, but by attention. You breathe, and the moment shifts. This doesn't mean you approve of bad behavior. It means you refuse to let your peace be stolen by things beneath your control. It's the same with fear. Fear thrives on what if? What if I fail? What if they leave? What if everything falls apart? But those fears are just mental noise pretending to be important. You don't silence them by shouting over them. You silence them by realizing they are just thoughts, not truths. Stillness allows you to see that not everything that feels urgent deserves your energy. The moment you stop reacting, you start observing. The moment you stop fighting, you start seeing clearly. And in that clarity, wisdom grows. You begin to make decisions not from panic, not from ego, but from presence. And presence is the quietest yet strongest place to live from. There is a reason monks live in silence for days or months. It's not to be dramatic. It's because in the absence of noise, what is false begins to dissolve. When no one is performing, when there's no one to impress, when the thoughts have no audience, truth starts to rise. The inner truth that you are not broken, not powerless, not unworthy. You are simply covered in layers of noise, and every moment of stillness peels those layers away. Non-reaction is also the gateway to deep relationships. When someone vents at you and you don't retaliate, they meet their own echo. When you don't add fire to fire, the flames die. Your calm becomes a mirror, and often people soften in response to it. But even if they don't, you remain unharmed, because your peace no longer depends on their behavior. This is not suppression. This is transformation. You aren't pretending to be calm while boiling inside. You're choosing calm because you've seen that boiling achieves nothing. You've seen that reaction is often the ego's way of proving it's still in control. And you've seen that control is an illusion that costs you your freedom. The real freedom begins when you stop believing every thought, every emotion, every opinion that arises. When you become the one who watches instead of the one who acts on every impulse. Stillness trains you to return to this place over and over again, not once, not occasionally, but every day. Eventually, the silence that used to be foreign becomes familiar. It no longer feels empty or boring. It becomes home, the place you return to when life gets loud, and the more time you spend there, the more the noise loses its grip. Even your identity loosens. You begin to see that you are not the roles you play, not the stories you tell, not the past you carry. You are the space in which all of those things come and go. And that space doesn't need to control anything. It simply allows. It witnesses. It holds. And in that holding, everything finds its natural place. This is what it means to let go of control, not to abandon responsibility, but to stop trying to manage what was never yours, not to stop caring, but to stop clinging, not to give up, but to give in to the natural rhythm of life. When you live like this, silence becomes a friend, a refuge, a teacher. So the next time noise comes knocking, whether from the outside world or from within, don't answer right away. Sit, breathe. Let the sound pass through you like wind through an open window, and when it does, you'll notice something beautiful. The silence never left. It was simply waiting for you to return. Once you begin to taste the peace that arises from not reacting, you naturally become more curious about what else can be released. What else doesn't need your control, your worry, your grasp. And in that curiosity, you begin to notice something so close, so constant, yet so often ignored. It's been with you from the moment you arrived in this world. The breath, and not just any breath, but a breath that reveals the deepest truths if you truly pay attention. This is where we now turn our attention, because in the teachings of the Buddha, the breath is not just a biological process. It is a path, a teacher, a mirror. There is something deeply humbling about watching the breath. It comes, it goes. No permission, no warning. It doesn't ask what kind of day you had. It doesn't wait for your approval, it simply flows. And that's the point. The breath teaches one thing more clearly than anything else. Everything arises and passes away. Everything. Nothing stays, not even the inhale. This is the essence of the Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha's teaching on mindfulness of breathing. A teaching so simple that many overlook its depth. Because what can breath possibly teach, right? But sit with it long enough, and it starts revealing the most profound lesson of all. Grasping is pointless, because what you're grasping is already on its way out. No matter how tightly you try to hold the inhale, it turns into an exhale. No matter how deeply you cling to a moment, it moves on. The wind does not ask for direction, it moves freely, and so does life. The breath helps you practice letting go in real time. Every single inhale is an invitation. Every single exhale is a surrender. You breathe in with awareness, and you breathe out without control. This rhythm is not forced. It's not invented. It just is. And when you follow this natural rhythm with your attention, without interfering, something remarkable happens. The mind begins to calm itself, because it starts to mirror the breath. And when the mind breathes like the lungs, softly, gently, naturally, it becomes light. It becomes clear. But most people don't breathe this way. Most people breathe with tension, shallow and rushed. Their breath is a reflection of how they live, grasping, hurrying, fearing. Yet the breath doesn't need to be forced. It doesn't need to be directed. When you stop trying to control it, it flows with perfect intelligence. And that alone reveals something radical. Not everything needs your input. Not everything needs to be managed. You don't need to steer every part of life. You can let some things move on their own, and they will still work. This is the wisdom of non-grasping. The more you observe the breath, the more you realize you've been holding tightly to things that were never yours to hold. Control, expectations, outcomes, people, plans. They were never fixed. They were always wind, and the wind doesn't obey. It visits, then it leaves, and you can't catch it in your hands, no matter how hard you try. That realization is not meant to be depressing. It's meant to be freeing, because the moment you stop grasping, you start living, and the breath shows you how to begin. Just sit, breathe, watch. You'll notice how each breath appears out of nothing, lingers for a moment, and dissolves without effort. It doesn't announce its arrival. It doesn't complain when it's time to go. It simply fulfills its role in silence. What if we approached our experiences the same way? Let them come, let them go. No attachment, no resistance, just presence, just participation without possession. The Anapanasati Sutta is more than a meditation instruction. It's a training in reality. It teaches you to track what is real, not what the mind wants. It teaches you to feel directly, instead of thinking about what you feel. When you pay attention to breath, you're not escaping life. You're meeting it fully, without the extra layer of stories. You begin to see that every grasping thought is a fiction. I need to get this. I must become that. This should not happen. These are like trying to tell the wind where to go, and the more you insist, the more you suffer, because life doesn't follow your plan. It follows its own nature, and the breath reminds you of that nature constantly. It flows through your body not because you earn it, but because you are alive. And it leaves when it's time, no matter how tightly you want it to stay. The breath is the most honest thing in your life. It doesn't lie. It doesn't pretend. It just expresses the truth. Nothing is permanent, and nothing belongs to you. This truth can be scary at first, because we want things to last. We want certainty. We want control. But the more you live, the more you realize that permanence is a myth. People change. Circumstances shift. The body ages. Ideas evolve. Relationships transform. And when you start to breathe with awareness, you start to understand this change not as a loss, but as a rhythm that cannot be mastered, but can be harmonized with. This is why Buddhists do not chase after things, not because they don't care, but because they understand the cost of grasping. Grasping makes the hand close, and a closed hand cannot receive. But when you stop grasping, when you let go, your hands are open again, and open hands are ready for whatever comes and whatever leaves. You don't learn this once. You relearn it every breath. That's why breath meditation isn't just a technique. It's a reprogramming. It's a retraining of your deepest reflexes. Instead of clinging, you observe. Instead of resisting, you allow. Instead of controlling, you accompany. That's the art of living with the breath. The breath also teaches patience. You can't rush an inhale. You can't force an exhale. You have to wait. You have to stay with it. And in that waiting, you develop a kind of wisdom that modern life rarely offers, the wisdom of rhythm. Not pushing, not chasing, just meeting each moment as it arises. And you begin to see that this approach can apply everywhere. A stressful situation arises. You breathe with it instead of panicking. A painful memory surfaces. You breathe through it instead of shutting down. A conversation triggers discomfort. You breathe before speaking. These are not small shifts. They are radical. They stop the pattern of reaction and replace it with presence. Eventually, your breath becomes your anchor. In every situation, in every challenge, it grounds you not by fixing anything, but by reminding you of the one thing that is always real. This moment, this body, this breath. Everything else is thoughts. Everything else is weather. And slowly, without trying, the obsession with control begins to fade. Because now you have something better than control. You have awareness. You have equanimity. You have a home in yourself that does not depend on everything going right. This is the gift of anapanasati. Not just relaxation, but insight. Not just calm, but clarity. You begin to see that impermanence is not your enemy. It is your greatest teacher. Because it tells you what matters, it shows you what is real, it strips away illusions and gives you the one truth worth holding. Everything changes. So hold lightly, love deeply, and let go when it's time. The wind has no master. It does not follow commands, but it nourishes all things. And the breath is just like that. It doesn't need to be gripped or shaped. It simply needs to be honored. Not with words, but with presence. Not with effort, but with trust. And so tonight, as you lay your head down, let the breath remind you, not everything needs to be fixed. Not every thought needs to be followed. Not every fear needs to be solved. Breathe. Let the inhale come. Let the exhale go. You are safe in this moment. You are whole, even as everything shifts, because the wind does not ask for direction, and neither do you. Not when you are resting in your breath. Not when your peace comes from within. Once you begin to trust the breath, to follow its rhythm without trying to control it, something subtle starts to shift inside. The grip softens. The mental pace slows. But beneath that breath, there's another layer. Still tense, still clenched. It's not the breath anymore. It's the mind. The part that holds on to thoughts as if they are facts. The part that insists, resists, judges, and worries. And now we go deeper, right into that clenching space, because peace is not complete until even the mind releases its grip. There's a quiet kind of suffering that doesn't scream, doesn't bleed, doesn't leave visible wounds. But it's there, in the constant planning, the overthinking, the internal rehearsals for conversations that may never happen. It's in the exhaustion from trying to manage what can't be managed. That's the closed fist of the mind, always holding, always tightening, believing it has to. Most people live as if the mind is a container that must remain full of ideas, strategies, solutions, control. But that fullness becomes weight. The more you carry, the less you feel. The tighter you hold, the less you can breathe. And yet, the mind keeps grabbing, convinced that letting go would mean losing control. But here's the truth that Buddhist wisdom gently reveals. You never had control in the first place, only the illusion of it. The mind wants ownership. It claims your successes. It clings to your failures. It builds stories around every feeling, labels every sensation, and inserts itself into every outcome. And it does this with one purpose: to feel secure. But mindfulness exposes the trick, because when you sit quietly and watch, you begin to see that thoughts come and go whether you like it or not. That no matter how hard you try, you can't force peace. You can only allow it, and allowing means loosening the grip. That's the practice of unclenching the fist of the mind. Letting go of mental control, not because you don't care, but because you see that clinging doesn't help. It only adds tension. You think worrying about the future protects you from it, but it doesn't. It only steals your presence. You believe overthinking a decision guarantees the best result, but it doesn't. It only guarantees exhaustion, and none of it changes the outcome. The Buddha taught that suffering begins with attachment. Not just attachment to things or people, but attachment to how life should unfold. When the mind builds a picture and insists reality must match it, tension begins. You start to feel like life is off course, even if it's just different than your preference. That's the trap. The belief that what happens is supposed to match what you expected. But the mind's expectations are not reality. They're guesses. And when you see them for what they are, the grip starts to loosen. You learn to meet life as it is, not as the mind says it should be. That doesn't mean you lose ambition or stop making choices. It means you stop arguing with what's already here. You stop turning every experience into a project to fix. And in that stillness, you notice something surprising. Most of the pain you thought came from the world actually came from your own resistance to it. Mindfulness helps you see this in real time. You're waiting in traffic, and the mind says, This is a waste, but that's not a fact. That's a judgment, and it turns waiting into suffering. You miss a goal, and the mind says, "You're falling behind." But that's not truth. That's interpretation, and it turns growth into failure. The more you believe these thoughts, the tighter the fist becomes. But when you witness them without attachment, without becoming them, they lose their power. It's not about silencing the mind. It's about changing your relationship to it. You don't need the thoughts to stop. You just need to stop gripping them. You need to stop building your identity from them. Because when you think, "I am my anxiety," or "I am my past," the mind has clenched again. But you're not those things. You're the awareness behind them. And awareness does not cling. It just sees. The mind also clenches around outcomes. It attaches to results, measures worth in success or failure, and tries to micromanage the future. But this is where the deepest suffering hides. Because life doesn't always cooperate. Sometimes you do everything right, and it still falls apart. Sometimes the path you planned disappears, and the tighter you held it, the more it hurts. But when you let go, something else happens. You begin to move with life, not against it. This shift is not passive, it's powerful. It takes courage to release control, to say, "I will do my part, but I will not grasp the result." It takes maturity to hold effort without attachment, to act without clinging. And that's what the Buddhist path teaches. Right action, right effort, right intention, all without the need to own what comes next. Because outcomes are shaped by many causes, not just your effort. The seed, the soil, the sun, the season, all play a role. You plant, but you don't force the flower to bloom. Mindfulness becomes the practice of loosening control moment by moment. You breathe, and you notice how thoughts try to pull you forward or drag you back. You label them kindly, thinking, worrying, planning, and return to now, again and again, and each return is a tiny release, a micro moment where the fist unclenches, a moment where you are not tangled in the mind's grip, but resting in the body, in awareness, in presence. The more you do this, the more you feel the difference between being tight and being open. The tightness is tension, urgency, impatience. The openness is soft, curious, gentle. It welcomes experience without needing to own it. And that openness is where healing begins. People often confuse letting go with giving up, but they're not the same. Giving up comes from despair. Letting go comes from wisdom. Wisdom that says, "I can care deeply and still not grasp. I can love and not possess. I can try and not demand. I can move forward without dragging the past behind me." This is not weakness. It is the deepest kind of strength. You begin to notice where the mind clenches the most. Around relationships, around identity, around time. The idea that I must be seen a certain way. That this person must respond how I want. That I should be further along by now. These are all mental fists. They seem small, but they weigh everything down. And as long as you believe them, you will feel tight inside. But once you question them, once you soften your grip, space returns. The mind will try to convince you that releasing control is dangerous. That if you don't worry, you'll forget something. That if you don't rehearse the worst-case scenario, you'll be caught off guard. that if you don't plan every detail, life will fall apart. But these are stories, not safety, and they take more from you than they give. Stillness is not found by tightening your thoughts into a perfect strategy. It's found by loosening the need to have one. It's found by trusting that presence is enough. That awareness will respond when needed. That you don't need to hold the entire world in your head to walk through it wisely. And so, when the mind clenches again, which it will, you pause. You feel the grip. You name it. You soften. And if it clenches again, you do the same. No judgment, just practice. The practice of opening, of releasing, of returning. And with every return, the fist becomes a hand that doesn't hold so tightly, a hand that is ready to receive whatever life offers. Because in the end, life is not about controlling every detail. It's about learning to rest in the unknown, to be here without needing guarantees, to walk with open hands, to think without being trapped by thinking, to act without being owned by outcome, and to live without the constant pressure of controlling what cannot be held. Letting go is not an event. It's a way of walking, a way of thinking, a way of being. And every time the mind clenches, you now have a choice, to hold tighter or to soften. And that choice, repeated gently, patiently, becomes freedom. So once the grip of the mind begins to soften, a strange peace arises. But with it comes a question that stirs quietly beneath the surface. If the thoughts aren't mine, if the outcomes aren't mine, if even this identity I defend isn't fixed, then what really is? And that question leads us directly into one of the deepest and most liberating insights in all of Buddhist wisdom, the truth of emptiness. This isn't emptiness in a bleak or hopeless sense. It is emptiness as freedom, emptiness as clarity, emptiness as the end of trying to possess what was never designed to be held. There's a reason the Buddha taught emptiness again and again, because the human tendency is to cling, to want things to last, to make everything personal. But suffering doesn't come from what happens. It comes from this holding. Emptiness teaches that the pain is in the grip, not in the moment. And when we understand that nothing truly belongs to us, not thoughts, not roles, not even identity, we stop struggling to contain what cannot be contained, like trying to fill a cup that was meant to leak. The cup leaks by design. And that's not a flaw, that's the gift. Emptiness means that no thing, no thought, no label has an independent, permanent existence. Everything depends on causes and conditions. Everything is shaped by its context. What looks solid is actually in constant change, and that truth releases the pressure to make life hold still. We suffer because we treat life as a possession. We say, my time, my plans, my image, my control. But in emptiness, there is no mine. There is only the unfolding. What you call yourself is not one fixed thing. It's a process, a dance of shifting elements, perceptions, memories, and reactions. When you try to lock that process into a box called me, it hurts, because the box is too small for what's always moving. Shunyata, the Sanskrit word for emptiness, is not a theory. It's something you feel in your body when you finally stop resisting change. When you notice that even your mood, your opinion, your beliefs, they're not fixed. They rise and fall like waves, and the more you try to lock them down, the more pressure builds. But when you allow yourself to be empty, you become spacious. You become light. Think of how much energy is spent trying to preserve a self-image, trying to prove something, trying to hold on to relationships, roles, control. But what if you didn't need to? What if you saw that everything you are already shifts naturally, and your peace doesn't depend on keeping anything exactly as it is? That's the power of emptiness. Not that things are meaningless, but that their meaning doesn't need to be permanent to be real. Even pleasure becomes lighter when seen through this lens. You don't have to clutch the moment. You enjoy it and let it pass. You don't need to frame it, post it, repeat it. You just meet it. Let it nourish you. Let it go. The same with pain. It too will pass. Its weight comes from the story around it, from the belief that it should not be there. But in emptiness, there is no should. There is just what is, and it keeps moving. This doesn't mean detachment in the cold sense. It means connection without clinging. Being fully present with life, but not trying to own it. That's what makes the cup so sacred. Not because it holds everything, but because it's open enough to let things pass through. And when you live like that, nothing sticks. Not because you're numb, but because you're awake. Buddhist teachings speak of the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness as the components of what we call the self. But none of these are stable. None of them are independent. They shift, they dissolve, they reform. And when you examine them closely, you see that what you thought was a solid identity is just a flowing process. Just like breath, just like weather, just like the world. But we are taught from early on to seek permanence, to seek security in things staying the same. We try to build a solid life out of moving parts, and then we suffer when they don't stay put. But the wisdom of emptiness shows us another path. You don't need to hold everything together. You can let the pieces float, let the roles change, let the body age, let the plans adapt. There's no fixed self to protect. There's only presence. Even grief, through the lens of emptiness, begins to transform. Because grief often clings to what once was, trying to recreate it in the mind. But when you see the natural law of change, that everything comes to pass, not to stay, you stop blaming life for moving forward. You begin to feel gratitude for what was, without needing to trap it in the present. You stop freezing moments into monuments. You let them breathe again. In relationships too, emptiness brings relief. You stop expecting others to complete you or stay unchanged. You stop turning them into mirrors of your worth. You see that each person, like you, is a stream, and the healthiest connection is not 2 identities locked together, but 2 rivers flowing side by side, supporting, witnessing, changing. Even your goals can change in the light of emptiness. You stop chasing permanence. You stop thinking that once you arrive somewhere, suffering will end. Because there is no final arrival, there's only flow. And your peace comes not from fixing the river, but from learning how to float in it without fear. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care in a new way. You care without possession. You love without ownership. You live without the illusion that things must last forever to be meaningful. You become like space, allowing, open, full of possibility. And when you live this way, forgiveness becomes easier. Because most grudges come from the belief that the past should have been different. But when you see that everything is empty of fixed identity, you stop holding people to who they were. You let them change. You let yourself change, and you release the need to carry the pain forward. Even your thoughts lose their weight. You don't need to defend every belief. You don't need to be right. You realize that thoughts are just visitors. They don't define you. They pass through the cup, and the cup leaks by design. That's what makes you free. And when you meditate, emptiness becomes your home. You sit. Thoughts arise. Emotions flicker. Sensations change. You see that nothing stays, nothing holds, and the more you observe, the more you soften. You stop needing to anchor everything. You let it float, and in that floating, you find stillness. The ego wants to make a name, a brand, a legacy. But emptiness says, be here, now, not to be remembered forever, but to be fully alive while you're here. That's enough. That's more than enough. Life doesn't need to be grasped. It needs to be met. Moment by moment, breath by breath. And when you lay down at night, you can rest deeper. Because you're not holding the world together in your sleep. You're not rehearsing, not preserving, not gripping. You're letting the mind empty itself. And the peace that comes from that emptiness is like no other. So the next time life feels heavy, ask, what am I holding that doesn't need to be held? What if I let it leak through? Not to lose it, but to let it complete its cycle. Because even beauty becomes brighter when you know it's passing. Even love becomes purer when it's not trapped in fear. This is what it means to live as the cup that leaks by design, to stop blaming yourself for not being able to hold it all, to stop striving for permanence, to surrender the myth of ownership, and to begin tasting the freedom that comes only when you let everything flow. So now that we've emptied the mind of clinging and let go of the pressure to possess what life was never meant to hold, there's one more tight knot we need to loosen. It hides behind ambition, behind self-improvement, behind even the most spiritual goals. It is the deep, quiet panic that things must happen now, or soon, or else they lose their meaning. It's the anxiety of the clock, the illusion of being behind, the belief that we're late to our own lives. And to dissolve it, we need to understand something that's always misunderstood: karma. Karma has been twisted into so many shapes that its real message often gets buried. For some, it's a threat: do good or else. For others, it's a kind of wishful math: do this, get that. But what if karma is something slower, something quieter? What if karma is not a vending machine, but a seed? What if it works on a timeline that your mind doesn't get to control? The obsession with immediate results keeps people trapped in cycles of frustration. They meditate for a week and wonder why they still feel anxious. They act kindly and expect the world to return the favor before dinner. But karma doesn't follow urgency. It follows truth, and truth ripens on its own time. Buddhism doesn't teach karma as a punishment or a reward. It teaches karma as a natural law, like gravity. You don't need to believe in gravity for it to pull you down. Karma works the same way. Every intention, every word, every action plants something. But not every seed blooms tomorrow. Some take years, some show up in ways you don't expect. And this is what releases you. Because when you understand that, you stop trying to rush your growth. You stop demanding proof from the universe. You begin to act from integrity instead of from expectation. The reason karma feels urgent is because the ego wants control. It wants a guarantee. It wants the comfort of seeing the payoff. But karma doesn't work on your deadlines. And that's a gift. Because it means you're not the manager of the timeline. You're only the gardener. You water, you tend, you show up. And life decides when to bloom. The Buddha taught that every action creates a ripple, but not every ripple returns in a way you can trace. That's the mystery. And it teaches humility. Because when you truly understand karma, you stop performing kindness to get a reaction. You stop using spirituality to bargain with the universe. You do what's right because it's right. You do it cleanly, quietly, without needing to be seen. And that's what frees you from timeline anxiety. The anxiety that says, I should be further by now. It's too late. Why is this taking so long? These thoughts are not truth. They are fear wearing a clock. But life unfolds like a field, not like a calendar. There's no set hour when it must all make sense. And your peace doesn't depend on how fast things move. It depends on how gently you let them move at all. Letting go of urgency doesn't mean giving up. It means shifting where your power lies. Instead of clinging to outcomes, you return to your intention. Instead of needing results now, you stay with what is here. The most powerful people are not the ones who chase results. They are the ones who act with quiet consistency, trusting that their impact is unfolding even when they can't see it. This is not easy in a world that runs on speed. Social media tells you success should be instant. That happiness is a 5-step hack. That healing should take a week. But deep change doesn't follow trends. It follows laws of nature, and nature does not rush. Bamboo spends years growing underground before it breaks the surface. Trees lose all their leaves before blooming again. Karma, too, unfolds like this. And when you realize that, you can finally breathe. You can stop measuring your life by progress bars. You can return to the now. Karma also teaches accountability without shame. Because when you let go of urgency, you stop panicking over past mistakes. You understand that every step, even the wrong ones, plants something. And even if you regret the seed, you can still choose how to tend the garden. Guilt becomes unnecessary. You begin to focus not on punishment, but on direction. What am I choosing now? What seeds am I planting today? When people say everything happens for a reason, they often mean well, but karma doesn't always give you clear answers. It gives you consequences. And the most important part is that you're not stuck. Because karma isn't fate, it's feedback. And the more aware you are, the more freedom you have to shift your path. Mindfulness is what sharpens that awareness. You begin to catch your patterns sooner. You see how certain thoughts lead to certain reactions. You start noticing the quality of your intention, whether it's rooted in fear, pride, love, or truth. And the cleaner the intention, the clearer the karma. Not faster, but truer. And truth, even when slow, carries more peace than speed ever could. This is why monks live slowly, not because they don't care, but because they trust the long path. They know that rushing doesn't speed up awakening, it only creates more distraction. They take one step, one chant, one breath at a time, and in that slowness, clarity grows. You don't have to become a monk to live this way. You just have to start questioning the inner rush, the voice that says you're not there yet, the voice that counts your worth in milestones. You don't owe anyone a timeline. You don't need to prove your pace. The world might reward urgency, but your soul rewards presence. Karma unfolds better when you stop checking the clock. Even in relationships, this helps. You stop forcing connections. You stop measuring love by speed or success. You begin to meet people where they are, not where you think they should be. You give without needing a receipt. You offer space without pushing. That's karma too. It's not just about action, it's about the energy behind it. This is how you begin to trust life again. You see that nothing is wasted, that every pain, every joy, every quiet choice is part of the field. And even if the bloom takes longer than you hoped, it's still real. And maybe it's blooming somewhere you haven't looked yet. So next time you feel the rush, pause. Ask yourself, who gave me this timeline? Who said, I need to be there by now? Often, it's not your voice. It's a voice you picked up. And when you let it go, you begin to return to something older, truer. The voice of the earth, the voice of karma. And that voice says, move slowly, move clearly, move with love. The rest will unfold when it's time. And in that space, life becomes more generous. Because when you're not demanding instant return, you start seeing quiet gifts. The peace of a simple breath, the joy of unnoticed progress, the strength in patience, the reward in the act itself. Karma becomes less of a scoreboard and more of a compass, not tracking your wins, but guiding your way. And you stop obsessing over whether it's working because you trust that it always is, even if you never see all the results. The point isn't to control the ripple. The point is to create it with care. So rest tonight, knowing that everything you've done with clarity and compassion has left an imprint, whether you see it or not, whether it returns tomorrow or never at all. It was not wasted. It was not ignored. It was part of the unfolding. And that's more than enough. Once the pressure of urgent results begins to dissolve and the mind is no longer trapped in timelines it can't control, something even more powerful begins to reveal itself. The understanding that peace, progress, and even awakening do not arrive through force. They unfold through clarity, through presence, through the art of doing without clinging. Because the truth is, sometimes the gate doesn't open because we're pushing too hard, and sometimes the door was never locked at all, but it only responds when we stop knocking. There is a kind of exhaustion that comes not from work, but from striving. A mental weariness born from constantly pushing, constantly reaching, constantly trying to prove something to yourself, to others, to life itself. The idea that if you try just a little harder, life will finally begin. But Buddhist teachings offer a different approach. Not laziness, not passivity, but right effort. Effort that is rooted in wisdom, not obsession. Intention without attachment. Movement without desperation. Right effort is one of the steps of the Eightfold Path, but it is often misunderstood. People think it means to try harder, but it doesn't mean doing more. It means doing less of what causes suffering. It means knowing when to act and when to rest, when to move, and when to release. The effort is not about force, it's about balance, the right amount, the right spirit. Striving is effort contaminated by craving. The kind of effort that says, "I'll meditate so I can become enlightened faster," or "I'll be kind so people finally see my worth." These are efforts that are secretly demands. They pretend to be noble, but they're really contracts with the future. I'll do this now, but only if I get that later. That kind of effort always ends in burnout, because it's not clean, it's full of fear. But when you stop knocking, when you stop trying to break down the door of peace with the hammer of effort, something begins to change. You realize the gate was never closed, that your pushing only created friction, that your striving kept you in your head. But when you soften, when you act from stillness, you start to feel something different. A sense of movement that isn't forced, a direction that doesn't need to be chased. Non-attached intention is the essence of this. You set your aim, you plant your seed, but you don't grip the outcome. You water it without needing a specific flower. This doesn't make you less committed. It makes you more awake, because you stop wasting energy on control and start investing in presence. You work, you give, you create, not to force something to happen, but to express what's already alive in you. You act from fullness, not emptiness, from alignment, not lack. This kind of intention is magnetic. It draws the right conditions over time because it's not fueled by panic. It's calm, focused, clean, and it allows life to respond, not immediately, not always in the way you planned, but in the way that fits your path, even if it surprises you. When people say, "Let go and let life," they're not saying, "Don't try." They're saying, "Try differently. Try with less grasping, less chasing, more trust." Let your effort be a whisper instead of a scream. Let your actions be offerings, not negotiations. That's when the gate opens, because your hands are finally empty enough to receive. The Buddha did not teach endless struggle. He taught the middle way, a path between indulgence and self-punishment, between apathy and obsession. The middle way is quiet, but it's powerful. It says, do what needs to be done, with care, with presence, and then let go. Don't twist your effort into anxiety. Don't turn your goals into prisons. Even in meditation, this shows up. The more you try to force your mind to be silent, the louder it gets. But when you sit gently, observing, allowing, the silence comes by itself. Not because you chased it, but because you created the conditions for it. It's the same with peace, with love, with insight. You don't push them through the door. You open the space and let them arrive when they're ready. This is the deepest meaning of non-striving. It doesn't mean you stop dreaming. It means you stop demanding. You stop measuring your worth by how close you are to some imaginary finish line. You begin to live from within instead of chasing something outside. You begin to realize that presence is more valuable than progress. Right effort also means choosing your energy wisely. There is a difference between being busy and being aligned, between activity and clarity. You can spend your whole day chasing and end up nowhere. Or you can move with awareness, with simplicity, and reach further in stillness than you ever could in panic. Even healing follows this rhythm. You can't force yourself to heal faster just because you want to feel better. You create the conditions. Rest, self-compassion, presence, and healing unfolds at its own pace. You don't need to rip the petals open. The flower knows when to bloom. This shift from striving to right effort changes your whole experience of life. You wake up with less pressure. You begin your tasks with more ease. You speak with more honesty, because you're no longer trying to control how you're perceived. You show up because it feels right, not because you're afraid of falling behind. And in relationships, this shift is everything. You stop trying to fix people. You stop needing them to behave a certain way. You offer your love, your attention, your truth, but without strings, without invisible contracts. You allow people to be on their own path, just as you're on yours, and your peace stops depending on their choices. This doesn't mean you give up on effort. It means you refine it. You bring it into balance. You become wise with your energy. You stop scattering your attention. You act with intention, and then let the wind carry it where it may. Right effort is like sailing. You don't try to control the wind. You adjust your sail. You read the current. You move with what is, not against it. That's what opens the gate. That's what creates movement. Not because you forced your way in, but because you learned how to align. When you live this way, you also make peace with time. You stop needing things to happen on your schedule. You understand that the right conditions bring the right results, not the right amount of pressure. You release the belief that effort must always look hard, that productivity is the same as worth, that faster is better. In fact, many breakthroughs come not in moments of struggle, but in moments of rest, when the mind softens, when the heart opens, when striving dissolves. That's when clarity enters, not because you chased it, but because you made space for it. And if you look closely at your own life, you'll see it's true. The moments that shaped you most didn't arrive when you were forcing them. They arrived quietly, unexpectedly, when something in you let go, when something opened. That's the moment the gate responds to, not the knock, but the stillness between knocks. So tonight, as you rest, let that stillness grow. Let the knocking stop. Let your effort soften into intention. Let your dreams breathe without the pressure of needing to arrive tomorrow. Let life unfold without being demanded into shape. The gate will open, not when you beg, not when you pound, but when you become the kind of presence that no longer needs to push. When the striving ends and the door opens without force, what remains is not emptiness, but direction without demand. A movement that rises from stillness, not from pressure. The absence of grasping doesn't mean drifting. It means something deeper begins to guide you, something that doesn't need control, persuasion, or tight plans. It walks because it's time to walk. It pauses because it knows to pause. And this is where the Zen and Chan traditions begin to whisper their strange and beautiful truth. The ox walks without a rope. In traditional Zen paintings, the image of the ox is a metaphor for the mind, powerful, restless, untamed. In the early images, the ox is wild, and the practitioner struggles to catch it. The rope symbolizes discipline, techniques, effort. But later, as understanding deepens, the ox walks calmly beside the person, and eventually the rope is no longer needed. The ox walks on its own, not because it was conquered, but because it was met, understood, made whole again. That image holds a quiet revolution. It means peace does not need to be forced. That the inner mind, once truly seen and accepted, no longer resists. The more one tries to dominate the self with rules, fear, or pressure, the more resistance grows. But when understanding replaces control, peace becomes natural. No rope, no leash, just harmony. In Zen, this lesson is not taught through thick books or detailed strategies. It's taught through presence, through paradox, through direct experience. A monk once asked his teacher, "How can I find the way?" The master replied, "Stop walking away." Another monk asked, "What is enlightenment?" The teacher answered, "Your everyday mind." These responses sound strange because they're not meant to explain. They're meant to stop the noise of seeking, to turn the student back inward to the silence where true guidance lives. The ox that walks without a rope is not lazy. It's not disinterested. It moves with precision. But its direction doesn't come from external commands. It comes from alignment, from the still center within. And when we live from that place, decisions become clear. Not because we've figured everything out, but because we've learned how to listen. Most people think they need to control themselves to be good, to stay on track. But control often comes from distrust. It says, "I can't trust my mind, my body, my instincts. I must tighten the grip." But Zen teaches the opposite. It teaches that your true nature is already balanced, already whole. It's only when you interfere, trying to manage, fix, or correct, that chaos begins. This doesn't mean you throw away all practice. It means you understand the purpose of practice. You meditate not to force peace, but to clear away what hides it. You observe the breath not to control it, but to remember what natural rhythm feels like. And over time, the mind stops needing the rope. It walks with you, because it no longer sees itself as separate from you. This inner unity is what gives Zen its quiet power. The practitioner doesn't move in fear of doing it wrong. They move in trust, in awareness. They become attuned to the subtleties of experience, to the moment when tension enters, to the shift in breath when a false belief arises. And in those moments, there is no whip, no shame, just a return, a soft return to the middle, again and again. The ox doesn't follow a map, it follows its own steps. But those steps are guided by something deeper than logic. That's what Zen calls suchness, things as they are, life unfiltered, decisions made not from overthinking, but from full presence. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What is needed now?" The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. Control says, "I need to get this right." Wisdom says, "I need to be here." Control says, "Let me fix this feeling." Wisdom says, "Let me feel it fully." One path tightens, the other opens, and the ox, once wild, feels the difference. When the rope is gone, you also stop trying to perform. You're no longer acting like a spiritual person. You're just being. You let go of the need to look calm and instead become calm. You let go of the need to explain and simply embody what you've learned. Your life becomes your teaching, not your words. People feel your peace not because you preach it, but because you carry it without needing to display it. And when setbacks happen, you respond differently. You don't panic. You don't think, "I've failed." You see the mind stirring, the ox wandering, and you smile. You return to stillness. You adjust gently. You don't need to pull hard to come back. You just remember. Because peace that is not forced doesn't get lost easily. It knows the way home. This kind of peace also doesn't rely on conditions. It doesn't wait for the world to be quiet before resting. It walks through noise without being pulled into it. The ox grazes in the middle of the market, unbothered by the shouts. You meditate not just on the cushion, but while doing dishes, while speaking, while walking down the street. Awareness becomes natural. It walks with you. It doesn't need reminders. It is the reminder. In Chan tradition, they say, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Meaning, nothing changes on the outside, but the inside has transformed. You still move, still work, still live, but from a different place, from ease, from clarity, from the unshakable center that doesn't need controlling anymore. This also means you stop trying to be someone else. You stop chasing the idea of the perfect practitioner. You stop comparing your path to others. The ox walks at its own pace. So do you. And when you realize that, you let others walk their pace too. No judgment, no need to correct, just space, just respect for their unique rhythm. Freedom arrives when you trust that your own nature knows the way, that you don't have to grip so tightly, that the deepest parts of you already understand how to move through life. You don't need to force growth. You need to create the space for it. And when you do, the ox moves, slowly, quietly, without the rope, without fear. And so, as the ox walks on its own, unforced and unbound, something softer starts to awaken within, a kind of reverence. Not for rituals, not for traditions, but for life itself. You begin to feel it in small moments, where trying fades and surrender rises, where presence isn't just peaceful, it's respectful. This is where we move next, into the space where the mind stops trying to stand above everything and instead begins to bow. Not from weakness, but from wisdom. Not from defeat, but from knowing what cannot be moved, like a cloud drifting quietly before the mountain. Humility is not the absence of strength. It is the maturity to know where strength ends and surrender begins. The cloud does not challenge the mountain. It passes, it adapts, it reshapes itself without losing its nature. And this is what the mind must learn to do in the presence of what cannot be controlled. Not everything can be overcome. Not every situation bends to your will. Not every outcome can be rewritten. But when the mind bows, genuinely, fully, without resistance, it becomes free. Most people misunderstand humility. They think it means lowering yourself, giving up, or becoming passive. But true humility is none of these. True humility is fluidity. It is the willingness to stop pushing when something cannot be pushed. It is the ability to stand in front of difficulty, pain, or uncertainty without breaking. Because you've learned to bend. Like the cloud, you're not rigid, you're responsive. Mental flexibility begins here. It's not about being clever, it's about being open. The rigid mind says, this shouldn't be happening. The flexible mind asks, now that this is happening, how do I move with it? One creates tension, the other creates possibility. Humility allows the second question to exist. The Buddhist path is filled with stories that reflect this. Monks learning to accept their teacher's silence, disciples bowing to painful truths, masters pointing not to power, but to emptiness. And over, the message returns. Stop trying to be bigger than the mountain. Let it humble you. Let it teach you. Not because you're unworthy, but because you're ready. When you resist life, you suffer. But when you bow, the suffering changes. It softens. Not because the situation changes, but because your stance does. You're no longer at war with reality. You're no longer arguing with what's already true. You're participating, not dominating. This is especially important when facing what is truly out of reach: death, illness, loss, aging. These are the mountains. No mindset can erase them. No habit can outrun them. And trying to outthink these truths only exhausts you. But humility gives you another path. It lets you sit with these truths without being crushed by them. It lets you live beside them without fear. The cloud that bows is not giving up. It's choosing grace. It's saying, I will not try to change the unchangeable. I will not waste energy trying to hold up what will fall anyway. I will flow. I will breathe. I will continue without needing the world to shrink to my preferences. This kind of flexibility becomes even more important in relationships. Because people are mountains too. You cannot mold them. You cannot force them to speak your language, share your timing, or carry your expectations. But you can love them where they are. You can adapt. You can soften without losing your center. And in your own heart, you learn this lesson too. There are parts of yourself that cannot be fixed, only understood. There are wounds that will not vanish, only be carried with more care. Humility says, I don't need to be perfect to be at peace. It says, I can carry pain without being defined by it. That's the kind of inner strength no force can shake. In the Zen tradition, students often bow before they enter the meditation hall, not because they worship the room, but because the bow prepares the mind. It says, I leave my pride at the door. I leave my certainty. I enter this moment with open hands. And those open hands can receive far more than clenched fists ever could. You don't have to wear robes to practice this. You just begin to notice when you're resisting something that can't be moved. A closed heart, a stubborn reality, a moment that won't unfold how you planned. And in that moment, instead of fighting, you bow inside. You whisper to yourself, this too deserves my respect. This changes how you work, how you love, how you heal. You don't demand perfection from the process. You don't rush the lesson. You let it unfold. You trust that even the hard parts carry meaning, that even this pain might be a kind of teacher, not because you enjoy it, but because fighting it has only made it worse. The mind that learns to bow becomes more peaceful because it finally stops expecting everything to cooperate. It accepts that chaos is part of the order, that brokenness is part of the story, that beauty doesn't come from control, but from acceptance. And when others see you living this way, something shifts in them too, because humility is contagious. It quiets a room, it invites vulnerability, it makes space for others to show up honestly without pretending. You stop needing to impress, and others stop feeling like they need to perform around you. The space becomes real. This is how peace deepens, not through control, but through presence. You begin to sense the quiet intelligence behind things, the order within the disorder, and instead of standing above it all, you step into it. You become part of it, not as a hero, not as a master, but as a participant, a presence, a witness, and even your spiritual practice changes. It becomes less about achieving something and more about dissolving the self that needs to achieve. You're no longer trying to reach the top of the mountain. You're learning how to sit at its base and listen, and in that listening, wisdom grows, slowly, silently. The cloud teaches this better than any book. It doesn't question the wind, it doesn't argue with the cliff. It moves, it bows, it changes shape again and again, never fearing the shift. And in doing so, it finds freedom in every form. So the next time something heavy enters your life, ask yourself, not, how do I win, but how do I honor this? Not, how do I erase this, but how do I live beside it? The answers may not come quickly, but even asking that question shifts your energy. And that shift may be the beginning of peace. Letting go of control is one thing, but letting go of superiority, that's deeper, that's harder, because it means releasing the mind's last defense, its belief that it knows best, that it stands above the mystery. But when you let that go, the mystery finally lets you in. You stop standing outside of life, judging it. You step inside, fully, humbly, when you begin to bow instead of resist, when you stop demanding that life match your expectations, something deeper begins to unravel. Not just your grasp on the world, but your grasp on who you think you have to be within it. You start noticing how much of your suffering hasn't come from events themselves, but from the endless effort to manage your identity, to hold a role, to protect a self-image that is constantly under review. And in this noticing, the next lesson appears. The freedom that comes when the thread finally lets go of the needle. So much of modern suffering is invisible. It's not pain in the body. It's the quiet, heavy strain of performing. It's the tension of constantly curating how others see you. It's the mental tightness that comes from stitching together an image, one that looks good, sounds wise, stays consistent, stays admired. But the more roles you try to hold together, the more you feel pulled in directions that exhaust your soul. Eventually, the thread starts to fray, and the only way to heal is to release the needle. In Buddhism, the idea of self is seen as a construction, not a lie, but not a solid thing either. It's a process, a performance, something made up of memories, emotions, reactions, beliefs. It feels real because it's repeated so often. But when you sit still, when you really watch the mind without feeding it, the self-image begins to lose its shape. And while that can feel unsettling at first, what comes next is clarity. The mind wants to be someone. It wants to be understood, respected, admired. It wants to feel in control of how it's seen. But this is the trap, because the more you try to manage perception, the more you drift from presence. You start making choices not from what feels true, but from what will look good. You say yes to things you don't want, just to protect an idea. You avoid your truth because it doesn't fit the script. And every time you do this, the real you disappears a little more. Letting go of roles doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. It means releasing the need to attach your worth to any particular mask. You can still be a parent, a teacher, a leader, but you are not only those things. You are not the praise you receive. You are not the criticism you fear. You are not a product to be evaluated. You are awareness. You are life in motion, and that life doesn't need an audience to be real. The thread can stitch, yes, but it can also rest. It doesn't need to hold everything together to matter. That's what we forget. We think we'll disappear if we stop performing. But the opposite happens. When you stop trying to be seen a certain way, you start being seen in a real way. You stop hiding behind roles, and people meet the presence underneath. The one that doesn't need titles. The one that doesn't need applause. This detachment is a form of inner peace. You're no longer guarding your identity like a fortress. You're no longer exhausting yourself defending a version of you that isn't even accurate half the time. You start to laugh more, to speak plainly, to admit confusion, to be okay not knowing, because the thread no longer needs to hold the needle. It doesn't need to patch every gap. It doesn't need to prove its usefulness. It simply rests in its nature, soft, strong, free. The Buddha taught that clinging to identity is one of the deepest roots of suffering, because identity says, I am this. And every time life shows you something different, you resist. If you believe you're the wise one, you can't admit mistakes. If you believe you're the strong one, you can't show pain. If you believe you're the helper, you can't ask for help. Every label becomes a trap. But when you start to see those labels as temporary, you begin to live with more fluidity. You can move between roles without becoming lost in them. You can wear the mask when needed and take it off without fear. You know the truth underneath is untouched. And that truth doesn't need decoration. It doesn't need to be liked. It just is. Social pressure often reinforces these attachments. You're taught from childhood to be someone, to find your lane and stay in it, to succeed and then keep succeeding. But the heart doesn't work that way. The heart doesn't fit in a single description. It expands, it contracts, it contradicts itself. And that's not a flaw, that's aliveness. When you stop managing how you're seen, you also stop being controlled by the past. You no longer need to match old versions of yourself. You can change, grow, evolve, or stay still. And no apology is needed, because the thread is free now. It's not tied to the performance. It's not stuck in the loop of fixing and proving. This freedom also affects your relationships. You stop expecting others to stay in character. You allow them to change too. You stop needing them to act according to your story. You make space for their process, their unraveling, their softening, and you stop turning every misunderstanding into a personal attack, because your peace isn't wrapped around the needle anymore. Even in your spiritual path, this shift brings transformation. You stop trying to be spiritual. You stop using language to sound awakened. You just live it, quietly, honestly, without display. And that's where real depth comes from, not from how you look in the mirror of others, but from how at ease you feel when no one's watching. Detachment from roles also brings a strange kind of joy. Because when you're not acting, everything becomes lighter. You laugh more at yourself. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to be right all the time. You're not always performing wisdom. Sometimes you're just breathing, And that breath feels enough. The thread that lets go doesn't become useless. It becomes available. Available for real connection, for spontaneous action, for presence. And because it's no longer tangled in the effort to stitch every opinion into something flattering, it can finally rest. It can finally soften. This doesn't mean you disappear. It means you stop holding a false version of yourself so tightly. You stop dragging the heavy expectations of how to be. And in that release, the real you, the quiet, aware, flexible self beneath the roles, gets to breathe. That breathing space is where creativity returns, where curiosity lives, where the soul doesn't have to perform. It just explores, learns, loves, makes mistakes, starts over. Not to impress, but because it's alive. And being alive is no longer something you have to explain. The mind may resist this at first. It may say, "But who am I without my title, without my certainty, without my image?" And the answer comes not in more thinking, but in silence, in stillness, in being here without the story. And in that space, you begin to feel a truth you've always known, that you don't need to be anything other than what you are right now. The role can fall away, the mask can drop, and what remains is not empty, it's full of presence. A presence that doesn't need validation to be real, a presence that doesn't collapse when misunderstood, a presence that walks gently because it's no longer trying to be more than it is. And so, once the performance ends and the thread releases its need to hold the needle in place, the next layer of letting go begins to reveal itself. It's quieter, more personal. It doesn't shout or ask permission. It just starts to slip through your fingers. Because this isn't about roles anymore. It's about the people, the circumstances, the memories you thought you could hold on to forever, the moments you didn't want to end, the comfort you wanted to last. But the river doesn't stop. It never has. And the more you try to grab it, the more it disappears. That's the next truth, one that every heart has to face. No river can be grasped. The Buddha often returned to the metaphor of flux, the reality that all conditioned things are impermanent. In the Pali Canon, he speaks of this as anicca, the law of constant change, not as a threat, but as a liberator. Because when you finally accept that nothing holds still, you stop clinging. You stop chasing stability in places where it was never promised. You stop gripping at people, places, and feelings that were only ever meant to flow through you, not live inside your fists. Grasping is born from fear, the fear of losing what feels good, the fear of being left behind, the fear of emptiness. But here's the paradox. The tighter you hold onto the river, the less of it you can actually experience. Water slips through clenched fingers, but when your hands open, you feel the current. You're not owning it, you're meeting it. That's what presence really means, not possession, but participation. This is where grief comes into the conversation, because grief is what rises when the river changes course and takes with it something or someone you loved. And the instinct is to hold tighter, to try and recreate what was. But the Buddhist path teaches another way. To feel the pain, yes, but not to make a home out of what's already gone, not to fossilize a memory into identity, but to bow to the flow, to let the river move, even when your heart wants to swim upstream. There is a reason monks reflect on death daily, not to become morbid, but to become free. When you know that all things pass, you stop expecting permanence from people. You stop expecting life to freeze in its sweetest moments. You start to love in real time. You start to say what matters before it's too late. You start to look into the eyes of those around you and realize that they too are rivers, changing, leaving, returning, but never still. This awareness doesn't make you cold. It makes you more tender, more alive. Because now you're not waiting to lose something before appreciating it. You're appreciating it while it's here. You're not sleeping through the moment, expecting it to repeat. You're awake, fully, because you know it won't come again in the same way. Trying to grasp the river leads to tension in every part of life. In relationships, it shows up as control. You want others to stay the same. You want them to stay close, to behave the way they used to keep giving what they gave at the beginning. But they're changing, just like you. And the more you resist that change, the more pain you feel. Not because they've done something wrong, but because you're demanding the river to flow backward. In your personal life, it shows up as nostalgia, as the ache for how things used to be. You cling to old versions of yourself, trying to fit into memories that no longer match who you are. But memory is a lens, not a time machine. And when you stop trying to return to who you were, you get to meet who you are now. You stop trying to relive the past. You start learning from it instead. Even your goals are rivers. You set intentions, you make plans. But the path twists, the conditions shift. What worked yesterday may not work today. And if you try to force life into your timeline, it resists. But when you adapt, when you listen to what the moment is actually asking for, you move with the river, not against it. There's also beauty in what flows away. Not everything that leaves is a loss. Some things pass because they've completed their purpose. A job that once gave meaning, a friendship that once healed, a season of your life that taught you something you needed. Letting go doesn't mean you don't care. It means you trust that some things aren't meant to stay. They're meant to open you, and then they're meant to go. The more you understand this, the lighter you become. You stop clinging to emotions that used to comfort you. You stop trying to extend moments beyond their natural life. You begin to experience freedom, not the kind that comes from getting more, but the kind that comes from needing less to last forever. This also helps you love without fear. Because love, in its purest form, is not about possession. It's about witnessing someone in their flow. Walking beside them, knowing they might change. Loving them anyway. Not because they belong to you, but because you choose to be present while your rivers align. The practice of mindfulness is the perfect mirror for this. Every breath comes and goes. Every sound, every sensation, every thought appears and dissolves. And when you sit long enough, you realize that trying to hold on to the silence is no better than trying to hold on to the noise. It's all movement. What matters is how gently you meet it. There's a quote in the Zen tradition, "Let go or be dragged." It sounds harsh, but it's true. Clinging doesn't stop the change. It only adds suffering to it. But when you let go, when you accept that the river is moving with or without your approval, you stop fighting every current. You float, you rest, you trust the direction, even when you can't see the shore. And when the mind panics, when it says, "But I loved that, I needed that, I wasn't ready to lose that," you don't argue, you breathe. You place your hand on your heart and say, "Yes, It mattered. Yes, it hurt. And yes, it's passing. You honor it. You let it leave with grace. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care without clinging. You stay open, knowing that everything beautiful has its time, that even the most precious people in your life are not yours to own, that even your own body is a temporary vessel. And this knowledge, far from making life meaningless, fills it with urgency, with presence, with compassion. You stop wasting your energy trying to preserve what was never meant to be frozen. You pour your energy into being here now, into showing up fully, into loving without fear, into walking your path, knowing that nothing is permanent and that this is not a problem. It's a blessing. The river flows. You don't stop it. You join it. You learn to feel its pace, to trust its direction, to release what has passed and welcome what arrives, not blindly, but openly, because now you know that what matters isn't what you keep, it's what you meet fully. So once the river is no longer something you try to hold, and presence becomes your way of meeting what moves, the next shift is not about what flows, but about what stops. Because letting go of people, circumstances, and expectations is only half the journey. The other half is subtler. It's about recognizing the part of you that keeps dancing, not out of joy, but out of habit. The endless emotional performance, the rehearsed responses, the constant reaction. And now, the stillness invites you to sit with that momentum and let it rest. Not collapse, not retreat, just stop. That is the teaching of the dancer who no longer needs to move. There is a moment in every spiritual path when you realize you've been performing not just for others, but for life itself. You've been reacting to every feeling as if it defines you, responding to every mood as if it demands action, jumping to express, explain, defend, or correct yourself before the world even asks. And at some point, all that movement becomes a cage, not because it's visible, but because it's constant. The Buddha spoke of this as the cycle of papanka, mental proliferation, the endless spinning of thought and feeling into story, identity, reaction. One emotion arises, and instead of letting it pass, you step into it like a costume. You perform it. Anger doesn't just rise, it becomes a script. Sadness doesn't just visit, it takes the stage. And underneath all of this is a belief. If I don't respond, I'm not real. If I don't react, I'm not seen. But what if stillness isn't absence? What if it's the space where truth begins to breathe? Because the most transformative silence doesn't come from muting the noise. It comes from no longer identifying with the role, from seeing that reacting is not the same as responding. That feeling something doesn't require performing it. That awareness doesn't need applause to be valid. This is where the dancer stops, not because the music ends, but because the impulse to perform dissolves. You still feel, you still experience, but the need to act it out vanishes. You sit with what is. You see the emotion rise like a wave. You don't run from it. You don't suppress it. But you don't jump into choreography either. You simply let it crest and fall. This space between emotion and expression is where freedom lives. Because until you've sat in that space, you don't realize how much of your life has been dictated by momentum. You weren't choosing your words. You were replaying patterns. You weren't meeting life. You were echoing memory. Stillness breaks that loop. It introduces a pause, and that pause reveals something shocking. Most of your reactions are habits, not truths. You react not because the moment demands it, but because your conditioning tells you it must be done. You learned it from family, from culture, from survival, but you never questioned it. And the moment you do, the performance weakens. Meditation teaches this directly. You sit. A feeling arises. The impulse to shift, speak, move, justify, it all arrives. But you don't follow it. You don't feed it. You stay. And at first, this feels unnatural, even threatening. Because the ego says, if you don't act on this feeling, you're not being real. But over time, a new truth emerges. Silence is not the opposite of truth. It's its foundation. The dancer who stops doesn't die. They wake up. They begin to see the stage for what it is. Not wrong, not fake, just not necessary in every moment. They step off of it, not in shame, but in peace. They realize that the deepest experiences don't require display. That presence doesn't need punctuation. This doesn't mean you never express again. It means your expression comes from clarity, not compulsion. From awareness, not identity. You don't cry to be heard. You cry because grief needs space. You don't speak to be seen. You speak when silence has spoken first. And that reverses the whole system. Now you live from the inside out, not from reaction outward. One of the great gifts of Buddhism is the understanding that feelings are not permanent. They are weather. And performing every emotional forecast only keeps you tangled in the storm. Stillness teaches you how to observe the sky, how to feel the wind without becoming it, how to acknowledge the cloud without wrapping yourself in it. This kind of detachment is not cold, it's compassionate. Because now you can sit with pain without turning it into performance. You can hold space for others without hijacking their moment. You can witness anger rise and fall without dragging everyone into its fire. You're no longer adding fuel. You're becoming the space around the flame. And when you live this way, you begin to trust yourself more. Because you're no longer reacting out of insecurity. You're responding from wisdom. You're not trying to prove your worth in every moment. You're not acting out of fear that you'll be forgotten if you don't speak. You found the courage to be still, and in that stillness, people begin to listen differently. Not because you shout, but because your silence carries weight. Stillness also frees you from emotional exhaustion. When every moment is a performance, burnout is inevitable. You wear too many masks. You carry too many scripts. But when you stop, when you allow the pause to deepen, your energy begins to return. You no longer drain yourself trying to control how every moment feels. You let it pass through. You feel deeply, but you don't drown. This is especially important in relationships, because many conflicts are not about what was said, but about what was performed. The tone, the reaction, the unspoken script behind the words. When you stop performing, the conversation changes. You listen more. You pause before responding. You're not trying to win. You're trying to understand. And that intention creates intimacy. The dancer who stops also begins to see beauty differently. You stop needing moments to be dramatic. You start appreciating the quiet ones, a glance, a breath, a simple truth spoken without tension. These are the places where life speaks loudest, and you don't need to add volume. This shift also changes how you handle the past. You stop reenacting old pain. You stop proving old wounds. You start honoring what happened without needing to keep reliving it, because now you're not the actor, you're the witness, and the witness holds space but doesn't collapse into the scene. You also learn that not every emotion needs a resolution. Some feelings are just visitors. They don't come to be solved, they come to be seen. And when you sit in stillness, you see them all. Joy, fear, longing, doubt. They rise, they teach, they leave, you remain. The world tells you that if you stop moving, you'll fall behind. But Buddhism teaches something older, that when you stop reacting, you begin to align. Not with trends, not with noise, but with truth, with natural rhythm, with the deep pulse of life that's always been guiding you beneath the performance. And now, the body begins to understand. It softens, the breath deepens, the nervous system no longer runs on alert. Because you've stopped living on stage, you've come home, to stillness, to presence, to the center that doesn't need applause to know it's real. When the dancer stops moving and the emotional stage falls quiet, a deeper silence follows, one that no longer resists what is happening. This silence isn't just stillness from within, it becomes a doorway. Because once you've stepped out of reaction, the world no longer needs to be filtered through judgment. You begin to notice how much energy has been spent not just on performance, but on protest, the quiet arguments in the mind, the way the heart debates every setback, the subtle resistance to what life brings. And now, you're invited into something else entirely, not escape, not analysis, but allowance. This is where we meet the monk who let the rain fall. There's a story passed quietly through Buddhist circles about a monk who once walked into a storm. Rain began to pour. The wind pushed against his robe, and as his fellow monks ran for cover, frustrated, grumbling, the monk continued to walk, calm, open, unmoved by complaint. When asked later why he didn't run, why he didn't cover himself, he said, "Because I am not at war with the rain." This way of meeting life is at the heart of Buddhist wisdom. The path is not about arranging the world to your liking. It is about freeing yourself from the belief that your liking is the measure of peace. Circumstances are rarely the real problem. It's your resistance to them that causes the wound. What you resist, you exaggerate. What you allow, you begin to understand. The monk who lets the rain fall is not passive. He is not careless. He simply does not argue with what has already arrived. That is what mental freedom looks like. Not a life with no storms, but a life that doesn't waste its breath cursing the sky. You face discomfort without needing to label it as wrong. You face challenge without telling yourself it should not be here. And the space that opens from that allowance becomes the birthplace of strength. Most suffering begins with an inner statement. This shouldn't be happening. That thought spreads like dye in clear water. It stains everything. The moment becomes personal, urgent, emotional. But when you meet the same moment with a different inner phrase, something as simple as, "This is what's here," everything shifts. You're not suppressing emotion, you're stepping out of the fight. Buddhist teachings refer to this as dukkha, the dissatisfaction that arises from grasping and resistance. And the solution isn't to eliminate every form of discomfort. It's to drop the illusion that comfort is owed to you. The more you expect life to match your preferences, the more fragile your peace becomes. But when you begin to open, to let the rain fall, peace returns, not because the world changed, but because you did. This is the beginning of intuitive resilience, not the kind that stiffens or fights, but the kind that bends and adapts. The monk who walks through the storm doesn't seek to dominate it. He moves with it. He adjusts his steps to the ground beneath him. He doesn't curse the mud. He watches his footing. And because he's not distracted by resistance, he's more aware, more capable, more alive to what's needed. The mind wants to fix everything, but not everything needs to be fixed. Some moments need to be felt, others need to be witnessed, and a few need to be accepted without needing anything else. Mental argument blocks that understanding. It clutters perception. But the moment you allow what is happening to simply be, a new form of clarity appears, one that doesn't require explanation. In Zen, there is a phrase, "Let it be as it is." This is not a shrug. It is a recognition that you do not need to control every element to walk wisely. Rain falls, people misunderstand you, plans collapse, emotions swell, and yet you can remain grounded, not by pushing back, but by stepping out of the mental storm entirely. This is what many monks and teachers learn through direct experience. Meditation isn't just about focus, it's about becoming spacious. It teaches you to observe without judging, to feel without rushing to solve, to sit with pain without becoming it. And in that practice, you begin to sense a deeper intelligence beneath the surface of events, something that guides you not through effort, but through attention. Intuitive resilience grows in this space. It's the capacity to respond without panic, to know when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when silence says more. But this only develops when the mind stops arguing with reality, because only then does your full energy become available, not tangled in complaint, not wasted on trying to reverse what's already here, but fully alive to what can be done now. In daily life, this shows up in the smallest ways. You miss a bus, someone interrupts you, a task takes longer than expected. The habit is to tighten, to resist, to fill the air with internal tension. But what if you simply noticed? What if you said, "This too is part of it"? That simple shift breaks the cycle. It replaces complaint with attention, and attention is where presence begins. This presence doesn't mean you abandon goals or discipline. It means you stop trying to push the river upstream. You stop trying to control what isn't yours to control. And that releases a huge burden you didn't even realize you were carrying, the burden of insisting life cooperate with your plans. Letting the rain fall is not giving up. It's aligning. It's recognizing that peace doesn't come from rearranging reality. It comes from dropping your war with it. And once that war ends, you don't lose your strength. You recover it, because now it's no longer wasted on resistance. It's focused, available, calm. This way of being also transforms your relationship with emotion. You stop identifying with every feeling that arises. Sadness can visit without becoming your identity. Anger can be seen without being obeyed. Fear can whisper without taking the wheel. Because now you know, emotions are not commands, they're weather. And the monk doesn't fear the storm. He walks through it, eyes open. The same applies to thought. The mind will always have something to say, but you don't have to argue with it. You don't have to believe every narrative it spins. When a thought says, "This is unfair," you can simply hear it and return to the breath. When a thought says, "This will never change," you can meet it with curiosity, not agreement. That's the difference between being trapped in the mind and observing it. And when difficulty arises, not just rain, but real storms, this practice becomes your anchor. Illness, loss, loneliness. These moments don't ask you to smile and pretend. They ask you to stay, not to fix, but to remain, to let the rain fall. Not because it's easy, but because resisting will only deepen the pain. And if you sit with that rain long enough, something incredible happens. You realize you're still here. The thing you feared might break you didn't. The pain didn't destroy you. The silence didn't swallow you. You remained, not untouched, but unshaken. And now you trust yourself more. You trust that you don't need to fight life to survive it. This is what the monk carries in his still walk. A quiet faith, a presence that doesn't flinch, a knowing that says, "Let it come, let it pass, I remain." And that kind of presence is more powerful than force, because it doesn't react, it responds, it doesn't collapse, it opens. This lesson begins on the cushion, but it continues in traffic, in grief, in waiting rooms, in long nights. It becomes the way you breathe, the way you hold silence, the way you carry discomfort without rushing to escape it. And with time, you begin to realize something extraordinary. You don't need the weather to be calm for you to be at peace. You don't need the world to be fair to stay whole. You only need to stop arguing, to let go of the thought that things should be different, to stop pouring your life into resistance, to let the rain fall. Once the storm has been allowed to fall without resistance, and the mind has stopped arguing with what cannot be changed, there is a softer silence that begins to reveal itself, one that doesn't measure, doesn't race, doesn't check how long the discomfort has lasted or how much time has passed since the last success. This silence doesn't ask, "How far along am I?" It doesn't keep score. It simply breathes. It simply is. And this next teaching grows from that stillness. Because when you've let go of your argument with reality, the next illusion to dissolve is the one humanity clings to most, the tyranny of time. This is where we learn the lesson of the clock that forgot the hour. Buddhism teaches that time is not as solid as it feels. It's a mental framework, a tool for function, but not a place to live. The deeper path begins when you stop organizing your peace around deadlines. When you no longer say, "I should be there by now," or "I'm running out of time," because the mind obsessed with pace can't feel the moment it's in. It's always in the next hour, the next milestone, the next version of life that still hasn't arrived. The clock, as we know it, divides life. It splits presence into past and future, then tells us the present isn't enough. It whispers that we're late, that we're behind, that others are ahead. It turns aging into a countdown. It turns growth into a race. It turns healing into a calendar. And in all this measuring, we lose the only thing that actually exists. now. The Buddha never rushed his students. He never taught enlightenment as a finish line. He simply invited them to be fully here, not better, not faster, just here. Because wisdom doesn't arrive on a schedule. Peace doesn't bloom from urgency. Insight doesn't follow a clock. It follows presence, and presence begins when time is no longer in charge. To live this way is not to reject time entirely. It is to put it in its place, to see it as a tool, not a master. You keep appointments, yes. You plan when needed. But you no longer wrap your worth around how long something takes. You don't punish yourself for not blooming quickly. You don't shame your path for its detours. You learn to live in rhythm, not in race. This change starts internally. You begin to hear how often your thoughts are framed in time. When will I get better? How long until this ends? Why is it taking so long to feel peace? And you gently respond with a deeper truth. It's unfolding now. Because the obsession with timing is just another form of resistance. It's a way the mind says, I can't accept what's here unless I know when it will end. But the present moment doesn't work like that. It doesn't promise a conclusion. It only offers itself. And when you truly receive it, without condition, something shifts. The pressure eases. The breath softens. The mind, which once ran ahead of you like a frantic dog on a leash, starts to return, to sit beside you, quiet, available, awake. This state of timelessness is not about stopping time. It's about stopping the internal chase. The part of the mind that keeps saying, it's not enough yet, I'm not there yet, I'm falling behind. That part quiets when you stop giving it the microphone, when you notice it speak and you don't follow. You come back to breath, to body, to now. In deep meditation, time can disappear, not because it's broken, but because the mind has stopped dividing it. Minutes become irrelevant. You stop asking how long you've been sitting. You stop calculating your progress. You just sit. And in that sitting, you begin to see that peace is not delayed. It's only hidden beneath the habit of chasing the next thing. This also changes how you view aging. The world tells you aging is decline, that the best has already passed, that the clock is a threat. But in Buddhist tradition, aging is respected not as decay, but as deepening. The lines on the face are not warnings, they are reminders that you have been alive, that you have endured, that you have grown into someone who knows what matters. When you stop measuring life by youth, you begin to live with more grace. You don't rush to stay relevant. You don't panic when birthdays arrive. You meet time like a friend, not a judge. And in that friendship, you find a kind of confidence that can't be taught, only uncovered. Even your relationship with goals begins to transform. You still work, you still create, but you stop letting urgency shape your effort. You stop thinking, if this doesn't happen by next month, it's too late. You let your actions be rooted in care, not fear, in alignment, not anxiety. And because you're no longer forcing progress, progress becomes lighter, more natural, more true. This doesn't mean you become lazy. It means you become present. It means your focus sharpens, not because of pressure, but because there's nothing pulling you into the future anymore. You're not leaking energy into imagined outcomes. You're using your energy where it matters, now. Relationships also begin to slow down. You stop expecting people to meet timelines. You stop rushing connection. You allow others to arrive in their own time, to grow at their own pace. And this makes space for real intimacy, the kind that isn't built on convenience, but on truth. You're no longer afraid of the long pause, the slow unfolding. You're no longer filling the silence with noise. You let people take time. You let love be patient. Timelessness also opens the door to creativity, because now you're not trying to produce something to meet a deadline. You're creating because it wants to be expressed, not because the calendar demands it. And in that space, your best work appears, not forced, not hurried, but honest, clear, alive. This doesn't mean time won't knock at your door. The world still moves, days still pass. But now you don't bow to the ticking. You don't let it drive your peace. You don't let it define your path. The clock may still turn, but inside you've forgotten the hour. And in that forgetting, you've remembered something older, something deeper. You've remembered how to listen to the moment, how to walk without rushing, how to rest without guilt, how to allow growth without schedule. You've remembered that the heart does not live in time. It beats now, and now, and now again. Each beat is enough. Once the clock no longer defines your peace, and the weight of when begins to dissolve, the next layer of freedom reveals itself, not in what happens, but in what you no longer feel compelled to pursue. Because when presence becomes enough, the hunger for constant gratification starts to fade. Not because the world has stopped offering fruit, but because your hand no longer rushes to grasp it. This is where patience transforms into wisdom, where desire no longer leads, where restraint becomes a form of power, not a form of lack. This is the quiet teaching of the hand that didn't pick the fruit. In most lives, suffering does not begin with pain. It begins with reach. The craving to have, to consume, to possess what is not yet ripe, or what may never have been yours to claim. The mind whispers, "Why not now? Why not more? Why not you?" And without even knowing it, the hand rises. It stretches. It grabs. And in that moment, freedom disappears. Buddhism calls this tanha, the thirst that creates suffering. Not thirst for water, but for possession, for completion through acquisition. The belief that happiness lies just beyond the next choice, the next achievement, the next sweet taste. But that taste, if it comes, fades quickly. And then the reaching begins again, a cycle without end, powered not by need, but by habit. But what happens when the hand doesn't move? When you stand beneath the tree, see the fruit, feel the desire, and choose stillness instead. At first, there is discomfort. The body feels it. The chest tightens. The mind insists you're wasting the moment. But if you stay with that discomfort, something changes. The urgency softens. The breath deepens. And slowly, the silence inside you begins to speak louder than the promise of the fruit. This is the path of mindful renunciation, not rejection, not denial, but clarity. You don't refuse the fruit out of fear. You simply see it for what it is. A momentary sweetness, a form, an experience, not a solution, not salvation, and because of that, you're no longer trapped by it. You can appreciate its beauty without needing to consume it. This kind of restraint is misunderstood in the modern world. It's often seen as repression, as missing out. But in Buddhist practice, renunciation is not a punishment, it's a freedom. The freedom of not needing everything. The freedom of being able to say no without tension. The freedom of not being ruled by every impulse that arises. The monk who walks past the fruit without picking it isn't denying life. He's mastering it, because he knows that what matters most is not what you reach for, but what you choose to let pass. Not because it wasn't tempting, but because peace matters more than momentary satisfaction. The same teaching applies to daily life. A thought arises, you don't have to follow it. An urge comes, you don't have to act on it. A craving whispers, you can nod, smile, and return to the breath. The fruit will be there, but your peace doesn't need to hang on the branch with it. You begin to notice how often impatience drives action, not because you need something, but because waiting feels unbearable. The hand reaches not for the fruit, but for distraction, for escape, for anything that will soothe the discomfort of stillness. But if you remain still, you learn something else. Waiting is not empty. Waiting is alive. It's a space where craving dissolves and awareness grows. This awareness reveals the patterns beneath desire. You see the ways you chase recognition, not because you need praise, but because you fear invisibility. You notice the ways you want control, not because you're cruel, but because you're afraid of uncertainty. And in that noticing, you begin to release, not because you're forcing yourself, but because the truth makes it easier. The hand that doesn't reach becomes a symbol of trust. Trust in the timing of things. Trust that not every opportunity is meant to be taken. Trust that some of the most powerful growth comes not from action, but from the ability to pause, to stay grounded while the world spins with invitation. This kind of discipline isn't cold, it's luminous. It brings warmth to your actions. Because now, when you do choose, it comes from clarity, not compulsion. You're no longer grabbing to fill a hole. You're selecting with awareness, and this makes everything more sacred. Each choice becomes deliberate. Each yes becomes a statement of alignment. Even in relationships, this restraint matters. You stop needing others to fill every silence. You stop needing constant affirmation. You love more freely because you're no longer trying to extract anything. You're not reaching to get, you're offering to share. And that shift changes everything. In meditation, this becomes your entire practice. Thoughts rise. You don't fight them, but you don't pick them either. You see them, you watch them fall, over and over again. The desire to daydream, to escape, to plan, to analyze. And yet, you stay. And the staying teaches more than any distraction ever could. This kind of stillness becomes a source of strength. You stop reacting to every invitation life throws at you. You stop chasing every possibility just because it's there. You learn to wait for ripeness, not just in fruit, but in decisions, in conversations, in responses. And that patience makes you powerful, because now you're not pulled in 100 directions. You're centered. Your energy is gathered, focused. You don't speak unless it matters. You don't act unless it's true. You're no longer wasting your life on temporary fixes. You're living from depth. Even your goals begin to shift. You stop needing to get somewhere quickly. You let your intentions breathe. You trust that the path will unfold, not by rushing, but by responding with precision. You move from presence, not pressure. And that movement has more impact than any frantic effort ever could. The world may not understand this way of being. It rewards speed. It celebrates urgency. But you've seen the cost of that life. You've lived the exhaustion of endless reaching. And now you're choosing something older, something quieter, something true. You're choosing to let the fruit hang, to watch it glisten in the sun, to appreciate it without needing to own it, to smile at the craving and stay still. Not because you're resisting joy, but because you found a joy that doesn't depend on outcomes. The hand that doesn't pick becomes the heart that doesn't ache. Not because pain disappears, but because attachment does. You no longer need the moment to complete you. You've already arrived. And from that place, everything becomes lighter. And when the hand no longer reaches, when the craving fades and peace grows stronger than urgency, there comes a deeper invitation. One that asks not just for stillness, not just for patience, but for the courage to let go of what once gave you life. Because true freedom is not only found in resisting what tempts you, it's found in releasing what once sustained you. The things that warmed you, grew you, held you. But now, without blame or failure, no longer belong to this moment. And this is where the next lesson rises, the tree that never held its leaves. In many ways, life teaches us how to survive loss. But what it rarely teaches is how to let go of the things that didn't hurt us, the things that once felt right, that once fed us, healed us, gave us identity and joy, the jobs that fulfilled us for a while, the relationships that once fit like skin, the beliefs that helped us navigate darkness. These are the leaves we struggle to release, not because they wounded us, but because we loved them. But in the Buddhist view of impermanence, anicca, this is where wisdom begins, because even nourishment has seasons, even beauty has endings, and peace doesn't come from holding tightly to what no longer grows. It comes from accepting that what once bloomed must also fall, not as punishment, but as rhythm, not as loss, but as renewal. The tree that never held its leaves was not broken. It was wise. It knew the leaves were never meant to stay. It knew that clinging to them would block the space for new ones. It let go, not in sorrow, but in trust. It dropped what once gave it color because the season had changed, and in doing so, it remained alive. This kind of letting go is subtle. It doesn't come with drama. It comes with silence. It happens when you stop forcing a feeling, when you stop pretending a passion is still there, when you stop dragging forward what your soul has already thanked and said goodbye to. And it feels like a kind of death, because in a way, it is. But it's also a beginning. You may look at parts of your life and realize that the identity you built is no longer true. The version of you that chased a dream, wore a title, played a role. It served you, yes. It brought you here. But now it weighs more than it lifts. And letting it go doesn't mean you're betraying your past. It means you're honoring its purpose and freeing yourself for what comes next. In Buddhist tradition, even attachment to teachings is cautioned against. The Buddha once said that his teachings were like a raft, meant to carry you across the river. But once you cross, you don't carry the raft on your back. You leave it behind, with gratitude, with peace, because even truth has timing, even guidance must be released when the path turns. This applies to healing too. Sometimes we hold on to the rituals that first brought us peace, the routines, the people, the systems. But healing is not a fixed structure. It changes. It evolves. And if you hold too tightly to what once healed you, you might miss the new medicine life is offering now. The tree doesn't mourn its leaves. It trusts the soil, the cycle, the wind. It doesn't beg for spring. It lives through winter with the same grace. It doesn't hold a single leaf in fear. And that's what makes it strong. Not its ability to keep, but its ability to release. You might find yourself clinging not to pain, but to memory, to the good times, to a version of yourself that once shone. And that attachment becomes invisible suffering, because you're living in a time that no longer exists. You're asking this moment to reflect a moment that has passed, and that quiet grief keeps you from meeting life as it is. Letting go of what nourished you is not ingratitude. It's the deepest form of respect. It's saying, "Thank you for what you gave me. I don't need to make you permanent to honor you." And in that thank you, you're free. Free to receive what this moment offers without comparison. Free to let the heart be full without needing to stay full in the same way. This is why many Buddhist monks live simply, own little, and move lightly. Not because they reject comfort, but because they understand how easily comfort becomes a cage. The mind attaches. It turns blessings into burdens. But when you live like the tree, always releasing, always opening, you stop confusing loss with failure. You stop assuming endings are personal. You start trusting that change is not your enemy. It's your companion. This mindset also changes how you love. You stop trying to preserve love in one form. You let it evolve. You love people as they are now, not as they used to be. You stop expecting them to feed you the same way forever. You allow space. You allow change. And love becomes less about possession, more about presence. It also softens your regrets, because now you see that nothing was wasted, even if it ended, even if it no longer fits. It had its time. It did its work, and its fading doesn't erase its value. It only means you've grown, that the soil is ready for something else. You may look back at old passions and wonder why they don't spark anymore. You may question if you've lost your way, but sometimes the heart outgrows what once set it on fire. And that's okay. Letting go doesn't mean you failed. It means you listened. You heard the quiet shift, and you honored it. This kind of presence also changes how you relate to goals. You no longer cling to them out of duty. You pursue them only if they align now. You're willing to walk away, not because you're weak, but because you're awake. You know that holding on can sometimes cost more than letting go. That staying just to say you stayed is not the same as commitment. It's fear disguised as loyalty. Letting go of what once nourished you also brings unexpected joy. Because in that release, new possibilities arrive, new callings, new voices within you. You clear the space, and life fills it, not always immediately, but inevitably. Because life rewards openness with growth, not always in the way you planned, but always in the way you need. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop clinging. You care fully while it's here, and then, when it's time, you release without bitterness, without resentment, with a heart that knows how to say both hello and goodbye with equal grace. The tree that never held its leaves wasn't lacking. It was wise. It stood tall because it didn't resist the fall. And you too can live like that. Not cold, not detached, but deeply aware that impermanence is not a problem. It's the proof that life is alive, always changing, always inviting you to grow again. And once the tree has released what once fed it, once the soul has bowed to the rhythm of change and let go of what used to feel essential, the next weight to fall is the mind's compulsion to tie everything together. Because even after the body releases, even after the heart softens, the mind still lingers. It still wants to explain, to finish the story, to loop back around for one more answer. But peace doesn't come from a conclusion. It comes from the moment you stop needing one. And that's where we are now. The thought that didn't finish itself. There is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing. It comes from thinking. Not from one thought, but from the ones that circle back again and again. The argument you keep replaying, the regret you still analyze, the moment you keep editing, the story you still try to rewrite even though it's already over. This is not reflection. This is entanglement. And Buddhism calls this papanka, the mental proliferation that turns simple thoughts into elaborate suffering. The mind wants resolution. It wants to finish the sentence. But some sentences aren't meant to be finished. Some thoughts are just weather passing through. But because they feel incomplete, we keep following them. We chase the ending. We try to find a clean answer to pain, a clear villain for the past, a sharp line that explains why things happened as they did. And in doing so, we create a prison made of our own conclusions. But what if you didn't finish the thought? What if the story didn't have to wrap up neatly? What if you could leave the question hanging and still be whole? This is the practice of releasing mental closure, not as a failure of intelligence, but as a triumph of wisdom. Because true clarity doesn't always come with words. Sometimes it arrives as stillness, as a space where no explanation is needed, just awareness, just breath. You don't need to know why they left, why it failed, why it didn't become what you hoped. Not because answers aren't valuable, but because they're not always available, and chasing them endlessly doesn't heal you. It distracts you. It pulls you back into loops, into rehearsals, into mental performances that feel urgent but go nowhere. The mind says, if I just think about it one more time, I'll feel better. But you don't. You feel more tired, because the comfort you seek isn't in finishing the thought. It's in letting it dissolve. This isn't suppression. It's observation without attachment. A thought arises, you notice it, and you don't chase it. You don't turn it into a speech. You let it hang in mid-air. You watch it fall on its own. And in that falling, a strange kind of freedom appears. This is why so much of Buddhist practice centers on silence. Not just external quiet, but internal spaciousness. Meditation is not a tool to think better. It's a doorway to think less, to see the mind's habits and not get caught in them, to feel the urge to conclude and instead return to the breath, again and again, until that urge itself starts to fade. When you live this way, something changes. You stop narrating your life like a novel. You stop needing to label every experience as good or bad. You stop assigning meaning where there is only motion. And that motion becomes peaceful, not because it's explained, but because it's allowed. You learn that the need to explain everything is often just the fear of sitting in mystery. But mystery is not the enemy. It's the space where presence lives, the space where you don't know, and that's okay. You don't know what they meant. You don't know why it happened that way. You don't know how it will turn out. But you are here, and here is enough. The thought that doesn't finish itself becomes your meditation bell. It rings, and instead of reacting, you bow, you return, you breathe, and now the mind isn't leading, you are. This also shifts how you handle conflict. You no longer need to win the conversation in your head. You no longer need to rehearse your comebacks. You stop rewriting what should have been said because you recognize that peace doesn't come from perfect lines. It comes from dropping the script. Even in moments of deep pain, this practice holds. You feel the sadness, the confusion, but you don't dress it in stories. You let it move through, raw, without decoration, and in doing so, it moves faster. Not because you fixed it, but because you didn't feed it. This kind of mental discipline is not cold or detached. It's warm, grounded. It means you care enough about your energy to stop wasting it on things that cannot be known or changed. You no longer need certainty to feel safe. You let the unanswered questions stay unanswered. And somehow, in that silence, you feel more whole. And this doesn't mean you never think deeply. It means you know when to stop. You know the difference between useful reflection and painful repetition. You know how to pause, to walk away from the loop, to close the mental window even when the browser begs you to keep scrolling. You may notice that people around you still live in the loops. They over-explain. They defend what doesn't need defending. They ask questions that were never meant to be answered. And instead of joining them, you listen, you nod, you offer stillness, because now you understand not every thought deserves a response. Some just need space to vanish. This practice even transforms creativity. You stop trying to force brilliance. You trust that inspiration will rise when it's ready. You don't finish the paragraph if it's not alive. You walk away. You let silence become your collaborator. And when you return, the words are clearer, not because you thought harder, but because you thought less. And now you begin to live without the need to finalize every emotional chapter. You don't need closure in the way you used to. You don't require life to wrap everything in a bow. You let things be incomplete. And strangely, you feel more complete than ever. The thought that didn't finish itself becomes your teacher. It reminds you that wisdom is not in the sentence, it's in the pause. Not in the point, but in the space after the point. You live in that space now, not as a retreat, but as a return. And so, as the unfinished thought fades into quiet, as the mind finally allows silence to take the last word, something even deeper begins to show itself. Not a thought this time, not a craving, but an energy, raw, hot, emotional. It doesn't speak in words, it speaks in sensation. It rises like a storm, it pulses like a flame. And before awareness was trained, it always got fed, fueled by panic, shame, doubt, defense. But now, something has shifted. The watcher has awakened. The hand doesn't reach, the mouth doesn't react. And in that stillness, the fire burns, but it feeds on nothing. And slowly, it dies. This is the wisdom behind the fire that fed on nothing. Every person carries inner flames, not just anger, but restlessness, fear, resentment, jealousy, despair. These aren't flaws. They're energies that pass through all human minds, but the suffering begins when those flames are fed, when the reaction arrives, when the thought reinforces the feeling, when the story is repeated, when the body is tensed, when the attention locks in and starts fueling what was meant to pass. The Satipatthana method, the foundation of mindfulness in early Buddhist teaching, offers the antidote. It doesn't try to suppress the fire. It doesn't shame it. It witnesses it. It observes it without judgment. It allows it to be exactly what it is, without adding the ingredients it normally feeds on: identity, storyline, aversion, indulgence. And in that clean observation, the fire burns out, not because it's been fought, but because it's been left alone. The method begins with 4 foundations of mindfulness: the body, the feelings, the mind, and the objects of mind. These are not academic categories. They are doorways. You watch the body breathing. You feel the sensations rising and falling. You notice the mind's shifting moods. You see thoughts for what they are: impermanent, impersonal, unreliable. And with each layer of attention, a layer of heat dissolves. Not instantly, but steadily. The fire feeds on your involvement. It grows when you think, "This shouldn't be happening." When you say, "Why do I still feel this way?" When you attach meaning, history, fear of the future. But when you just feel it as heat, as tightness, as contraction in the chest or the stomach, when you stay in the body without interpretation, the energy starts to run out of fuel. It's like watching a storm from behind a glass wall. You feel the thunder in your ribs, but you don't become the rain. You hear the wind, but you don't fly with it. You stay where you are, breathing, present, intact. And as strange as it sounds, this is where true strength is built. Not by pushing through, but by staying completely still as the waves crash. Not retreating, not reacting, just seeing. This witnessing is not passive. It's profoundly active. It takes effort to stay present without reaching for distraction. It takes clarity to know the difference between feeding and feeling. But the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. Your inner world may still flare up, but your attention no longer throws gasoline on it. You meet discomfort without panic, and discomfort without a story to live in doesn't stay long. Many people misunderstand mindfulness as a calming practice. And yes, it leads to calm. But not by trying to be calm. It leads to peace because it teaches you to stop resisting what arises. You don't have to like it. You don't have to want it. You just have to be willing to see it without fueling it. The fire doesn't need to be beautiful. It just needs to be seen without fear. The Satipatthana method also breaks identification. You stop thinking, "I am angry." You start seeing, anger is present. That small shift of language is a revolution. It creates space between awareness and experience. And in that space, freedom returns. You're no longer the flame. You're the one watching it flicker, knowing it won't last. You may still feel the heat in your chest, the tightness in your throat. But now, you don't interpret it as a sign of weakness or failure. You let the body speak its ancient language. You stay with the sensation, and you trust that your stillness is more powerful than the storm. You stop rushing to extinguish. You stop scrambling to fix. You simply allow. This kind of observation deepens over time. You begin to catch the flame before it catches you. The first flicker of frustration, the early tremble of insecurity. You notice it in the breath, in the shoulders, in the speed of thought. And you pause. You create a gap, a breath, a moment of choice. And in that moment, the fire begins to weaken, because now it's being seen, not entertained. You also begin to learn the difference between intensity and truth. Just because a feeling is strong doesn't mean it's right. Just because it burns doesn't mean it's wise. The fire wants urgency. It demands a reaction, but the witness doesn't obey. The witness breathes, waits, watches, and the urgency dissolves, revealing what was always underneath: space. This practice is especially powerful with shame. Shame is one of the most toxic flames because it disguises itself as truth. But when you watch it closely, without feeding it, you see what it really is: a story, a memory, a surge of energy in the body. You feel it without hiding, without explaining, without obeying. And in doing so, you rob it of its illusion of permanence. Even in moments of confusion, when the mind screams for answers, you stay with the not knowing. You don't rush to label the fire. You let it move through. You become the kind of person who doesn't need to react to every discomfort. And that kind of person is rare. That kind of person becomes a refuge for themselves and others. Because this doesn't just free you, it frees everyone around you. Your stillness becomes a mirror. Others feel it. They see that it's possible not to panic, not to defend, not to fight every sensation. And your calm becomes their invitation, not because you preached, but because you didn't add fuel. Over time, your nervous system begins to trust you again. It no longer expects you to explode. It learns that feelings can rise without triggering chaos. It softens, and so do your relationships, because now you're responding instead of reacting. You're not ruled by the fire, you're guided by awareness. This doesn't mean you become emotionless. It means your emotions stop running the show. They speak, but they don't drive. They pass through, but they don't take over. And in this way, you experience every feeling more clearly, more honestly, more fully, because now you're not afraid of them. The fire that feeds on nothing is still a fire, but without fuel, it becomes light, warmth, signal, not destruction, not war. It burns clean, and when it goes out, it leaves no damage, just the silence that follows truth. This is what Satipatthana teaches at its deepest level. That freedom doesn't come from eliminating suffering. It comes from dissolving the conditions that sustain it. And the most powerful of those conditions is your attention. Where it goes, energy flows. But when attention watches without grabbing, without judging, without naming, energy settles, the cycle breaks. And now, after sitting through the fire without adding fuel, after learning to observe without reacting, a new clarity begins to take shape, not just about emotion, but about the path itself. You begin to realize that even the practices that brought you here, the tools that saved you, the thoughts and teachings that once felt like lifelines, are not meant to be carried forever. Because part of freedom is knowing when to keep walking without the thing that got you across. This is the lesson of the raft that was left behind. The Buddha once told the parable of a man who comes to a great river. On one side is fear, confusion, suffering. On the other side is safety, peace, clarity. But there is no bridge. So the man builds a raft, out of effort, out of skill, out of whatever he can find. And it works. He crosses. He arrives. And once he reaches the other shore, the Buddha asks, what should he do with the raft? Should he carry it on his back because it helped him? Or should he leave it with gratitude and continue free? The answer is not about rafts. It's about attachment to what once served you. Because even wisdom, if held too tightly, becomes weight. Even healing tools, when clung to past their time, can become obstacles. Even the voice that once calmed you must one day grow quiet so that you can learn to stand in silence. At first, letting go of the raft feels disrespectful. You want to keep honoring what helped you. You want to stay close to the teachings, to the structure, to the identity that grew from your spiritual effort. But the deeper truth is this: if you carry what no longer serves, you cannot meet what is still ahead. The very thing that once saved you can slowly begin to limit you. There are beliefs you adopted when you were wounded that helped you survive. You needed protection. You needed a story. You needed a reason. And those beliefs gave you structure. They made the world make sense, but now, with a clearer mind and a quieter body, those same beliefs may not fit. And if you cling to them out of loyalty, you stay locked in a self that you've already outgrown. This is why advanced practice requires humility. Not just to admit where you're weak, but to admit where you've been helped and still must let go. The ego wants to hold on to what worked. It wants to turn practices into identity. It wants to define itself by what it knows. But wisdom doesn't collect, it sheds. It trusts that the path itself knows when to change shape. You don't forget the raft. You don't deny its value, but you stop needing to sleep with it every night. You stop measuring new moments by old lessons. You allow yourself to meet life without dragging the entire past behind you, even the beautiful parts. Meditation is a raft. The breath is a raft. The mantras, the rituals, the spiritual language, all of them are ways to cross. But when presence becomes natural, when awareness is no longer something you visit, but something you live in, those tools no longer need to be gripped. They become part of you, absorbed like roots. You don't have to remember what you've become. This applies to roles as well. Maybe you were once the seeker, the student, the wounded one who needed time and space and help. That identity brought you healing, but you don't have to remain in it forever. There comes a point where you don't need to be seen as the one who is healing. You just become someone who lives with gentleness, quietly, freely. You don't owe the world a label anymore. The raft can also look like control. Systems, rules, structures that made you feel safe during your early stages of awakening. Maybe you needed strict boundaries, routines, or philosophies to feel grounded. But now, the ground is within, and those same rules might feel tight, inflexible, outdated. Letting them go doesn't mean you're falling. It means you've grown. There are people who walk with their raft for years. They tell the story again and again. They define themselves by what they survived, how they got across, and there is value in honoring the journey. But the deeper you go, the more you realize the story is not the freedom. The freedom is in what happens when the story is no longer needed to explain who you are. Even spiritual concepts must be released. Enlightenment, ego, karma, self. These are maps, not destinations. If you believe in them too literally, too rigidly, you start building a new identity out of what was meant to liberate you from identity. The teachings are fingers pointing to the moon. If you cling to the finger, you miss the moon. So, the practice becomes subtler, less about adding, more about emptying, less about holding, more about resting. You no longer ask, "What can I learn?" You begin to ask, "What can I release?" And each release reveals more space, more clarity, more peace. Letting go of the raft can also mean letting go of relationships that were part of your growth. Not because they were wrong, but because the version of you that needed them has shifted. The person you became in their presence was necessary. But you are no longer becoming, you are now being. And sometimes being requires solitude, or new companionship, or none at all. This is not about abandonment. It's about alignment. You honor what was, you bow to it. But you don't confuse gratitude with obligation. You don't carry the raft out of guilt. You set it down with reverence. And you walk on. And you don't rush to find a new raft. You trust the ground now. You trust the breath, the body, the awareness that arises in each moment. That's enough. You stop defining your practice by how many tools you carry. You define it by how light you feel. This doesn't mean you never return to the raft. Sometimes, in storms, you may need it again, but you return to it out of wisdom, not fear, out of choice, not addiction, and that makes all the difference. You use the tool, but you are not owned by it. The monk who leaves the raft behind is not less spiritual. He's freer, because he's stopped identifying with the crossing. He knows the river is part of the journey, but it's not the whole path. There are forests ahead, mountains, fields of silence, and each new terrain asks something different. And so you become a traveler again, not a teacher, not a student, just someone who moves lightly, who carries nothing more than what this step requires, who lets yesterday be yesterday, who walks with open hands, trusting that what's needed will appear when it's time. And this trust becomes your new ground. You don't panic when you feel empty. You don't rush to grab the next lesson, the next identity. You allow the in-between. You let yourself be raftless, borderless, undefined. And in that space, the mind softens, the body breathes deeper, the soul says yes. And once the raft is set down, once the journey is no longer about proving how far you've come or how much you've carried, something rare begins to grow, a kind of stillness that doesn't seek attention, a sense of presence that no longer needs to be applauded. This is where the next transformation unfolds, because freedom is not just release from suffering, it is also release from the need to be seen. And here begins the quiet, profound wisdom of the flower that bloomed unseen. There is a peace that arrives only when no one is watching, a kind of joy untouched by external praise. It lives in the moments you do something meaningful and tell no one, when you help without needing thanks, when you create without needing it to be shared, when you grow not to impress, but because something in you must open. This is what it means to bloom without an audience. So much of modern suffering is rooted in the need to be witnessed, not in connection, but in recognition. A hunger not just to belong, but to be validated, liked, applauded, remembered. But this hunger doesn't feed the soul, it drains it. Because the more your peace depends on being seen, the more fragile it becomes. The flower that blooms unseen is not lesser, it is purer. It grows without performance. Its beauty is not for display. It doesn't bloom faster because it's being watched. It doesn't bend toward praise. It simply opens because that's its nature. And this is the hidden teaching. True fulfillment comes not from being admired, but from being aligned. In Buddhist practice, this is called anatta, the release of ego, of self-image, of the constructed self that constantly seeks identity in the eyes of others. When you let go of the story that says, "I am someone doing something impressive," what's left is the simple act of doing, of being, without the weight of expectation. And in this space, your effort changes. You stop measuring your worth by results. You stop needing milestones to feel legitimate. You no longer crave evidence of your growth, because now your growth is internal, silent. And that silence speaks louder than any praise ever could. This is where integrity begins, not in what you show others, but in what you do when no one sees. You meditate not to tell others you did. You practice compassion not because it's good optics. You tell the truth because it feels clean in your body. You keep your word because you value peace over image. This invisible life becomes your refuge. You no longer fear being overlooked. You stop resenting being misunderstood. You start feeling a kind of sacred privacy, a joy that doesn't need confirmation, a kindness that doesn't need applause, a clarity that lives beneath all performance. This doesn't mean isolation, it means no longer performing presence. You still show up, you still connect, but your energy isn't pulled toward proving anything. You sit with someone and just sit. You love without needing to be seen as loving. You work without needing recognition. And in this simplicity, there is freedom. The ego will resist. It will whisper, "But if no one sees you, it doesn't count." That voice is familiar. It grew up in a world where value was measured in likes, metrics, titles. But that voice is not truth, it's habit. And when you notice it and don't follow it, it weakens. You begin to feel a deeper rhythm, a quieter wisdom, one that doesn't rush toward the spotlight. Buddhist monastics understand this well. Many of their practices are intentionally invisible. They sweep paths no one will thank them for. They chant in silence. They serve food without names. Not to become invisible, but to remember that sacredness does not need display. That real transformation does not beg to be noticed. When you let go of the need to be seen, your senses sharpen. You start noticing small joys. The way sunlight hits a wall, the weight of your breath in your chest, the sound of wind in the trees. These details had always been there, but the noise of seeking kept you from them. Now, with performance gone, presence returns, and your creativity transforms. You write because something in you needs to speak. You paint because something inside needs to move. You create not for the world, but for the process itself. The doing becomes the reward. The making becomes the meaning. This applies even to healing. You stop trying to look like someone who's healed. You stop trying to prove you're better. You stop narrating your growth in case someone doubts it. And because of this, the healing deepens. It becomes honest, quiet, real. The flower that blooms unseen also teaches patience. You stop needing things to grow fast. You stop forcing the next stage. You let life unfold on its own terms. You don't push the petals open. You don't schedule your transformation. You let the roots grow deep, out of sight. This kind of life is immune to trends. It doesn't worry about being left behind. It doesn't chase relevance, because it knows the things that matter most are timeless. Kindness, integrity, presence. These don't expire. They don't fade. They don't need attention to matter. Even your relationships shift. You stop trying to impress people. You start choosing peace over being right. You let others have their opinions. You let misunderstandings breathe. You don't need to correct every misjudgment, because your worth is no longer up for debate. You've stopped offering it to the world for grading, and from this grounded place, service becomes deeper. You help not to be helpful, but because your presence naturally supports others. You give without keeping score. You teach without preaching. You listen without waiting to speak, and others feel this. They may not know why, but they feel safe around you. Because when someone blooms unseen, their peace radiates quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek a stage. It just is, like a flower in the forest, unknown to most, but changing the soil nonetheless. This is how lasting change spreads, not through loud voices, but through silent presence, not through influence, but through essence. You stop trying to be significant, and you become sincere, and that sincerity heals more than any sermon ever could. There is an old saying, the fruit of your practice is how you live your life, not what you post, not what others say about you, just how you show up, how you breathe, how you respond when no one is looking, and that kind of life cannot be faked. And once the flower has bloomed quietly, once you've stopped measuring your life by how many eyes are watching, the final illusion begins to loosen its grip. The illusion that you are stuck, that something out there is keeping you from peace, that you need to break free, push harder, earn your way out. But when the noise fades and the self no longer seeks applause, the silence reveals a deeper truth, that the door you've been trying to unlock was never locked to begin with. Feeling trapped is one of the most convincing lies the mind tells. It says you can't move forward because of your past, your circumstances, your pain, or your habits. It says freedom is elsewhere, in the future, in someone else's forgiveness, in success, in healing that hasn't happened yet. And so, you wait, you fight, you exhaust yourself trying to find the key. But the real prison is not outside. It's the belief that one exists. The Buddha taught that liberation begins not with effort, but with seeing clearly how we build our own walls, lock our own doors, and forget that we are the ones holding the key. And when you really see that, without resistance, without drama, the wall starts to dissolve. Not because anything outside has changed, but because the mind is no longer clinging to the illusion of being caged. Most of what we call stuckness is a story. a tight loop of thoughts that repeat themselves so often they feel like truth. But stories are not walls. They are just words, and words can be released. You tell yourself you can't leave the job, you can't forgive, you can't be at peace until something else changes. But often nothing has to change except your relationship with the story. This doesn't mean you ignore pain. It means you no longer let pain write the rules. It means you stop waiting for permission to feel free. You stop negotiating with fear. You stop assuming there's more work to do before you can exhale. You pause, you look around, and you realize you're not locked in. You were just waiting for someone to open a door that was already open. The belief in control feeds this illusion. It tells you freedom must be earned, that if you meditate enough, change enough, do enough, you'll finally be allowed to feel peace. But Buddhism teaches something more radical, that peace is not a result, it's a removal, a subtraction, not of effort, but of grasping, not of action, but of illusion. Control feels safe, but it's a tight safety, a clenched safety. It says, I must hold everything in place to feel okay. And so you grip your routines, your opinions, your identity. You try to manage every possibility, and in doing so, you mistake tension for stability. But true freedom is not control, it's trust, not in outcomes, but in your ability to remain whole, no matter the outcome. When you begin to release this illusion, your body changes. You stop bracing, you stop preparing for disaster, you stop expecting to be disappointed, you allow space between thoughts, you feel the breath without trying to fix it, you walk without needing the ground to be perfect, and this space is where the illusion loses power. Even your language shifts. You no longer say, I can't. You start to say, I choose. Not because every choice is easy, but because choice means you've remembered your role. You are not a victim of your thoughts. You are the awareness that sees them. You are not the story. You are the space in which the story appears. This also softens judgment. When you see that your suffering came not from being stuck, but from believing you were stuck, you stop judging others for their pain. You realize how easy it is to forget the door is open. You speak with more compassion. You listen without fixing. You hold space because you've learned what freedom really feels like. It doesn't need to convince. It doesn't rush. It just waits, quietly, until you're ready to walk through. This kind of liberation doesn't shout. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes in the moment you realize that nothing needs to be added to this moment for it to be whole. That you are already what you were seeking. That the practice was never to find freedom, but to notice that you are not trapped. This understanding also changes how you relate to your past. You stop thinking of it as a chain. You see it as a path. It didn't lock you in, it brought you here. You may carry scars, but they're not cages. You may have regrets, but they're not rules. The door is open. It has always been open. Even your goals begin to feel different. You don't chase them as escape routes. You walk toward them because they call to your joy, your alignment, not your need to prove you are finally free. You no longer need to achieve to feel alive. You already are. Meditation deepens this truth, not because it gives you new knowledge, but because it removes the noise that says, you're not there yet. It shows you that even in the presence of discomfort, stillness is available. that even in the storm, the door remains open. You just have to turn toward it. This doesn't mean life won't challenge you. It will. But challenge is not a cage, it's a movement. And when you don't resist it, when you meet it with curiosity instead of fear, you walk through it, not around it. That walking becomes the practice. 1 foot in presence, 1 foot in trust. No escape needed. The door that was never locked also teaches forgiveness. You stop waiting for others to say the right words. You stop waiting to feel differently. You realize that holding on to anger is another form of pretending the door is closed. Forgiveness doesn't change the past. It simply sets you free from dragging it forward. And now, with this understanding, everything lightens. You don't need to force yourself to feel okay. You realize that feeling stuck was just a misunderstanding of your own power. The power not to control, but to release, to return, to stand up and walk out of the room you thought you were locked inside. You breathe deeper. You stop seeking permission to rest, to smile, to let go. You don't need someone to unlock your heart. It was never locked. You don't need a perfect plan to be at peace. The peace was always underneath the planning. And now, as the last illusion falls, you begin to see that even failure, even confusion, even emptiness, none of it means you are broken. It just means you've been sitting in front of a door, waiting for something to change, not realizing that you've been free to stand, to walk, to live differently all along. And now that the door is no longer a mystery, now that you've seen it was never locked and that your freedom was always closer than your next thought, another kind of realization begins to rise. One that doesn't come from movement or progress or even liberation. It comes from stillness, from acceptance, from facing the things that never grew, the dreams that never sprouted, the efforts that ended in silence. Because the final chains are often built not from what hurts, but from what never happened. And this is where we learn from the seed that died first. Every person carries within them the outline of a life that never unfolded, a dream left behind, a version of themselves that didn't get to grow, a plan that started strong and then fell silent. These seeds are easy to overlook, but they hold some of the deepest teachings, because failure, when not turned into shame, becomes the most honest teacher of all. We are conditioned to believe that life is a straight path, that if we do the right things, make the right decisions, keep the right pace, the garden will bloom exactly as planned. But no soil guarantees fruit, no effort guarantees reward, and sometimes the thing you gave your heart to withers without a sound. The ego doesn't understand this. It wants reasons, it wants results, it wants proof that effort equals success. But the seed that dies first does not explain. It just lies quietly in the soil, unseen, reminding us that life is not a contract, it is a field. And not every seed is meant to rise. But what if that seed didn't fail? What if it served a purpose that was never about blooming? What if its gift was to show you what you were still clinging to, your belief in control, in certainty, in needing the outcome to validate the effort? Buddhism doesn't teach that all suffering comes from loss. It teaches that suffering comes from the refusal to accept impermanence. And failure, true, irreversible, silent failure, is one of the most direct expressions of impermanence. It strips away pretense. It humbles every identity. It brings you back to the ground, and in that ground, something else can be born. Not a new version of the same plan, but a different way of being altogether. The seed that dies first breaks the story. It forces you to stop pretending you know how this will go. It ends the fantasy, and that's painful. But it's also liberating, because without the fantasy, you're left with truth, with this moment, with the chance to grow, not because you succeeded, but because you remained. And there's another layer. Some seeds die to teach you who you are when no one is clapping, when nothing works, when all you have is presence. Can you still walk gently? Can you still breathe deeply? Can you still bow to life even when it doesn't reward you? The seed that doesn't sprout asks you to let go of the idea that life is something to win. It asks you to release the voice that says, "You're behind." It invites you to consider that maybe you weren't meant to build that dream, not because you weren't enough, but because something in you was meant to break open, not grow up. There's a quiet sacredness in things not working, in plans falling apart, because in those ruins, the need for perfection dies. The need to be impressive dissolves. You stop performing achievement. You stop chasing approval. And, in the stillness that follows, a different kind of growth begins. This growth isn't flashy. It doesn't look like progress. It looks like humility, like rest, like not needing every day to prove something. You stop asking, "What's next?" and start asking, "What's here?" And what's here might not be much, but it's real, it's yours, and it's enough. Failure also reveals attachments. You see how tightly you held the image of who you thought you'd be. You see how deeply you relied on success to define your worth. And in that seeing, you soften, you cry, you breathe, and slowly you start to live without needing to be someone. The seed that died first becomes a kind of spiritual compost. Its silence feeds your roots. Its stillness teaches you patience. Its absence teaches you presence. You stop asking life to fulfill your scripts. You start listening to what it's actually offering. And what it offers, more often than not, is unpredictability, change, discomfort, beauty in strange shapes. And when you stop demanding that everything bloom, you start appreciating what does. You stop measuring success by what the world sees. You start noticing how your breath deepens when you stop pretending, how your sleep softens when you stop needing answers. The ego says, "We could have done more." The soul says, "We did what we could." And in that gap, peace begins to return, because now your worth isn't tied to timelines. Your dignity isn't hanging on whether the seed sprouted. You begin to love yourself not for what you achieve, but for how you remain honest when nothing blooms. This kind of self-love doesn't need affirmations. It doesn't need mirrors. It's quiet, steady. It sits with you in the morning when you feel lost and whispers, "Even now, you are enough." It holds your hand when the plan crumbles and says, "You're still here." That counts. And now, you stop comparing gardens. You no longer feel small when others bloom. You no longer resent their light. You understand that every path has dead seeds. Every person carries quiet failures. And those failures are not shameful, they are sacred. They are part of the path, not proof you missed it. You begin to talk differently too. You no longer speak only of victories. You tell the stories of what didn't work, not to dramatize, but to humanize, to remind others that it's okay to fall short, that sometimes the most honest growth is invisible. And from here, you stop rushing to start over. You stop frantically planting new seeds to cover the silence. You let the soil rest. You trust that emptiness is not failure, it's space. You wait, you watch, you stop needing guarantees. This changes your spiritual practice. You no longer meditate to improve yourself. You meditate to witness what is. You stop trying to manifest outcomes. You start surrendering to what already lives within you. The breath, the stillness, the mystery. And finally, you bow to the seed that never grew. You thank it, not because it bloomed, but because it didn't. Because it helped you shed your pride. Because it gave you back your heart. Because it taught you that the real gift is not becoming something better, but becoming someone softer. And now the teachings have spoken, quietly, powerfully, through stories, silence and stillness. They've pointed not to the world, but to the self, to the breath that does not need controlling, to the thoughts that do not need completing, to the storms that do not need to be solved, only witnessed. This journey was never about escape. It was about remembering. That peace was not waiting at the end of the plan. It was in the breath you took without forcing it. That freedom wasn't something to reach, but something you returned to the moment you stopped trying to grip the ungrippable. Letting go is not a loss. It is a return to presence, a return to the part of you that no longer argues with what is, to the part that walks through the rain without needing it to stop. That releases the outcome without abandoning the effort. That breathes, not because everything is fixed, but because it no longer needs to be. So tonight, let the noise fall away. Let the weight fall off your shoulders. There is no door to unlock. There is no battle left to fight. There is only this breath, this silence, this peace you've been carrying all along. If this journey moved something in you, leave a comment below. Tell us which teaching stayed with you, which seed planted something new. Write, I release what I can't control. And if you'd like more teachings like these to meet you when the world gets loud, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell. Your peace is welcome here. Your quiet growth is seen. Until next time, rest well and let go.